Welcome to Buddhism Seeds, a place where we relax our hearts after a long day and step into the space of ancient Zen stories filled with wisdom. Amid the hurried pace of modern life, each of us carries invisible pressures on our shoulders, work responsibilities, worries, and thoughts that refuse to stop even late at night. These are what make sleep restless, leaving us tossing and turning as if we were running forever in a race with no finish line. But tonight, you don't need to battle your mind anymore. Let me, with a slow, gentle voice, guide you back to your breath, back to the present moment, where you no longer have to strain to be strong and don't need to prove anything to anyone. Because Zen stories are not just old tales, but droplets of wisdom distilled over thousands of years, gently soaking into the mind like rain into soil, soothing the layers of tension that have built up throughout the day. In the next 3 hours of storytelling, you will be immersed in profound lessons that never feel heavy. Each story is like a cool breeze brushing the heart, reminding you that you don't need to control everything. You only need to learn to let go at the right time so the mind can rest. Close your eyes, relax your whole body, and let the words slowly carry you into deep, peaceful, and complete sleep. And now, let us begin the first Zen story. Long ago, in a prosperous kingdom nestled deep in a misty valley, there was a king renowned for his love of knowledge. His palace was like a gilded maze where scholars, Zen masters, and philosophers from the four corners gathered to debate, write, teach, and spread ideas. Yet even living amid praise, the king often pondered. People say they seek the truth. But if they themselves cannot see the whole picture, how do they know what they are truly seeing? That question smoldered in his mind for many years, like a tiny needle quietly piercing each thought. Then one early winter day, when the sky was as gray as ash and crows circled the watchtowers, the king decided he would create an unprecedented challenge. That morning, the entire court was summoned. In the marble square where 5 colored flags whipped in the wind, the people gathered in a dense crowd, thousands of curious eyes fixed on a colossal creature being led in an elephant as huge as a moving hill. Its feet struck the stone, sounding like deep war drums, making the air seem to vibrate. Its ears flapped like great wind fans, its long trunk swayed, and each breath rose like pale mist. No creature so majestic had ever appeared in the capital. When the elephant stopped in the middle of the square, the king rose from his throne, his dark crimson robe trailing like fresh blood, his voice booming like thunder. Today, I do not want to hear you talk about books. I want you to touch the truth. He signaled, and from the inner chambers, 6 men were brought out. They were all blind from birth, with clouded eyes, gaunt faces, and a slow gait as if feeling their way through darkness. The crowd buzzed. The scholars frowned. Why would a debate about truth begin with 6 blind men? The king smiled mysteriously, then ordered, "Each of you will touch this enormous creature, then tell me what kind of being it is." The first blind man stepped forward, trembling his hand, searching the air until his fingertips met a moving, rippling mass of muscle. It was the elephant's trunk, warm, soft, constantly curling like a snake wrapping around his arm. He froze, heart pounding, then shouted, "Ah, this is clearly a giant snake. It's wrapping around me," he cried, backing away as sweat beaded on his forehead. The crowd gasped, Some children screamed. Several scholars scribbled furiously. The second blind man stepped up, reaching downward, and by chance hugged a leg as thick as a stone pillar. His hand stroked the rough, cold surface solid like an ancient tree trunk. He burst into loud laughter. "No, you're all mistaken. This isn't a snake. It's a gigantic tree growing out of the ground." The third gently moved toward the head and touched the ear as it flapped. The broad ear, soft like thick silk, brushed his cheek. The breeze from it made him start. "How foolish you are," he declared firmly. "This is a giant fan waving. I can feel the wind." The fourth touched the elephant's side, smoother flat, and spread out like a stone wall. He tapped it lightly. A deep, resonant sound echoed. He sneered, "A snake, a tree, a fan. You're all dreaming. This is obviously a sturdy wall." The fifth bent down and grabbed the tail thin twitchin with sparse, coarse hair. He jumped, then burst out laughing. "Ha, this is just a thick rope." The sixth knelt and touched the tusk, smooth and cold, like stone, sharp and hard. A light seemed to flicker in his clouded eyes. "You're all imagining things. This is a sharp stone spear." And so in the middle of the square, the six blind men began arguing fiercely. Their voices crashed like waves against each other. Snake, tree, fan, wall, rope, spear. They shouted, necks straining, pointing wildly, faces flushed like burning coals. They started shoving and nearly came to blows. The entire square erupted in chaos. The people were bewildered. The scholars murmured. Some shook their heads. Some smirked. The king sat still on his throne, saying nothing, only observing. His gaze was not the amused look of someone watching a spectacle, but the gaze of one witnessing the bare truth of human nature. When the quarrel reached its peak, a voice as light as a breeze sounded enough. The whole square fell silent. An old Zen master stepped from the shade of the portico, leaning on his staff, moving slowly like a flowing stream. His hair was ash gray, his plain gray robe simple, his eyes deep and clear like an ancient well. He looked at the six blind men, then at the king, and spoke softly yet clearly. "None of them are wrong, but none of them are right." He paused the tip of his staff, knocking once on the stone with a dry tuck, because each touched only a part, yet believed he had seen the whole. Those words blew through the square like a cold wind. Whispers died away. The scholars stopped writing. The six blind men stood motionless, hands still clutching at the air. The king quietly nodded. A faint smile appeared on his lips. Very slight, very deep, as if a question that had hung in his heart for many years had just been carried off by the wind. From that day on, the story of the blind men and the elephant was carved above the gate of the kingdom's largest library to remind everyone truth does not fit inside a single part. And the more one insists on being right, the easier it is to lose sight of the whole. Today, in modern life, we think we know so much. Each day we read dozens of status lines, scroll past countless headlines, and hear hundreds of snippets about this person or that. But the more information we consume, the quicker our minds judge. We see a fleeting expression and believe we understand an entire soul. We hear a brief rumor and believe we know the whole story. We grasp a small fragment of truth, then construct an entire picture of other people, of life, of the world. And then we say, "I know." But truth, like the giant elephant in the old tale, does not fit within a single touch. No single glance can contain the whole. Truth has many layers, dimensions, and shades interwoven like threads in a great silk tapestry. Touching one thread cannot reveal the entire cloth. Yet in our haste, we often mistake part for whole and use that fragment as the standard by which we judge, conclude, and condemn. What is the result? Countless arguments flare because each person believes they possess the entire truth. Countless relationships once close become distant because no one will step back to see the full picture. People who once loved each other turn away not because of a grave wrong, but because of a partial view. In the Buddha's teachings, this is called wrong view, a distorted way of seeing that does not recognize things as they truly are. The Buddha taught that to walk the path of liberation, the first requirement is right view, a correct way of seeing things as they are. Right view does not mean having ready-made correct answers. It means having an open heart that recognizes we might be wrong. A person with right view does not look at life through a tiny keyhole and declare it to be the sky. They are willing to open the window, widen their vision, and quietly observe from many angles. In modern psychology, there is a concept called confirmation bias, the tendency to seek only the information that supports what we already believe while ignoring what contradicts it. When we hold a prejudice against someone, the brain will unconsciously filter details to prove that prejudice right. That's why when we believe someone is lazy, we only notice when they pause to rest and forget the times they worked without eating or sleeping. When we believe someone is cold, we only remember the indifferent gaze and miss the nights they quietly cared for others. The brain doesn't intend to deceive us. It simply shows us what we want to see. And that is why people so easily fall into misunderstanding, conflict, and resentment. Buddhism looks at this very deeply. The self always tries to defend its own viewpoint. When the ego becomes too large, we stop seeking truth and only seek to be right. But truth was not born to serve the ego. Truth reveals itself only when we set the self down, when we are willing to listen and to look from another person's perspective. Right view does not require us to win every debate, to refute at all costs, or to strain ourselves proving who is right and who is wrong. Right view asks for just one thing: keep a humble heart. When the mind is no longer driven by the urge to prove itself, we can finally listen to understand, not to rebut. And in that very moment, something remarkable happens. Conflict softens, words grow lighter, and the heart opens far wider. In today's society where social media turns small matters into wildfires of public opinion, where only a few sensational lines can lead millions to judge someone, right view becomes all the more vital. Because most of what we see on the screen are fragments, even distortions of the full truth. Without right view, we are swept away like dry leaves in a storm, angered with the crowd, judging by impulse, losing the ability to discern what is real and what is false. Therefore, whenever you hear a story or witness an action practice, pausing, take a deep breath. Ask yourself, have I seen enough? Is there another angle I don't know? Is there a hidden pain behind the behavior I'm judging? This is the first step of right view, knowing that what we see may be only a small part, and with right view, we no longer need to win, because we understand that another doesn't have to be wrong for us to be right. Sometimes both are simply standing on different sides of the same truth. Those with right view don't judge hastily or conclude recklessly. They observe, listen, and look for causes and effects. They understand that every phenomenon has many interwoven layers, like a fabric woven from countless threads. Seeing one thread cannot explain the whole. And when the mind sees this clearly, anger finds no foothold and prejudice has no place to stand. What is precious is that right view not only helps us understand more accurately, it helps us love more. Only when we understand can we truly love. Only when we see the pain in others do we stop wanting to hurt them. Only when we recognize that everyone carries unhealed parts do we know how to be gentler with their mistakes. This is also why the Buddha placed right view at the beginning of the Noble Eightfold Path. If our view is wrong, every step that follows goes astray. But when our view is right, speech, action, thought, and effort gradually align. The mind grows less frantic, life grows lighter, and the world around us becomes far less jagged. In every family, if each person would look with right view, listen to the story from the other side, and trust that truth is not confined to their own words, many cracks would never form. In every organization, if each person would let go of a bit of bias and add a bit of understanding learning, to see the whole before judging the atmosphere would be less toxic. Cooperation would be steadier and hearts would draw closer. And then, little by little, those who once made us angry turn out to be people just trying to live as we are fumbling, awkward, and deeply wounded. When we stop insisting that we are right, we begin to see that everyone carries a part of the truth. Each small part is not wrong, but it is not enough. To see fully, we need to step back, open our eyes, and open our hearts. So don't let the ego distort the picture. Don't let momentary emotions cloud the truth. Don't be quick to believe you're holding the whole elephant, when perhaps you're only touching the trunk. Only when we see as things truly are, does the mind grow calm. And when the mind is calm, compassion naturally blossoms like a lotus opening on the surface of a still lake after the storm. On that day, deep in a cloud-covered forest, there was a small temple perched on the mountainside. The ancient temple with moss-gray roof tiles appeared and disappeared behind old pine canopies. Every morning, white clouds curled around it like incense smoke, and at dusk the bell echoed for miles. The path from the foot of the mountain up to the temple was like a gray silk ribbon winding around the cliffs, both steep and jagged with sharp rocks. Anyone climbing had to walk very slowly and breathe evenly, or else they would grow dizzy and tumble into the bottomless ravine. In that temple, there was a young novice who had not been there long. He was still small, with a round, chubby face and eyes that always sparkled with curiosity. But every morning, when the wooden fish drum sounded to mark the time for practice, and the whole group of brothers quietly lined up to climb the mountain, he was different. While everyone walked in silence with only the sound of sandals on stone and the wind rustling through the leaves, he always frowned and grumbled the whole way. "Why is this path nothing but rocks and gravel? My feet hurt so much. Why do we have to go this far? It's so hard. How can everyone be silent while I feel so uncomfortable?" His voice rang out of place in the stillness. At first he muttered, but the farther he went, the louder he got. Each step felt as heavy as dragging a sack of stones on his back. The more he complained, the more irritated he became. The more irritated, the more exhausted. And the more exhausted, the longer the road ahead seemed to stretch into infinity. Meanwhile, the other brothers kept a steady pace, their breathing light as a breeze, their eyes calm like a mirror-still lake. One morning, when the air was still misty, the master stood on the stone steps near the temple gate, fingering his prayer beads, clearly hearing the grumbling echoing up from the foot of the mountain. He waited until the line of novices emerged faintly in the fog, then gently raised his hand to signal them to stop. The novice was gasping, face-flushed brown robe sticky with sweat, the soles of his feet blistered. The master looked at him, his gaze kind but deep like an ancient well. He bent down, picked up a small stone from the dew-wet grass, a round marble-like pebble, and held it out in front of the boy. "Today, put this in your shoe, then keep climbing." The novice stared eyes wide at the stone, then at the master, stammering, I, in my shoe. Yes, in your shoe." Not daring to argue, he unfastened his sandal and carefully tucked the stone inside. As soon as he slipped his foot back in, it felt like a stubborn insect had settled in his shoe, waiting to scrape his foot with every step. He clenched his teeth and kept walking. After only a few steps, sweat dotted his forehead. The stone rubbed against his soul, each step like treading on thorns. The more he climbed, the larger the stone seemed to grow, pressing into his flesh, stabbing sharply. He gritted his teeth to endure it, but halfway up the path, sweat soaked his collar. His lips turned pale, and his steps staggered as if about to buckle. The stones along the way seemed sharper today, the slope steeper, even the mountain wind louder like a howl. At last, when his legs were trembling and his breath came in broken threads, he couldn't bear it anymore. Only then did the master speak, his voice steady and light as a breeze. "Stop." The novice let himself drop onto a rock, his whole body drained. The master walked over, sat beside him, pondered for a moment, then looked straight into his eyes. "Do you see? When there's a small stone inside your shoe, even on a flat road, every step turns into torture." He paused. His voice softened each word, slow like a bell's chime. "It's the same with the mind. When it's filled with negative thoughts, even in peaceful circumstances, each day becomes a rough, uneven road." The words fell into the novice's heart, like a cool drop of water slipping into every crevice of fatigue, echoing like a bell through the mountains. He sat quietly, eyes on his shoes. The tiny stone lay still inside, silent yet frightening, because it had turned the whole path into torment. He lowered his head quietly, took off his shoe, and removed the stone. As the pebble rolled away from his foot, so light it was almost nothing, he suddenly realized it wasn't the road that had drained him. It was what he was carrying inside. When the line of novices moved on, he stood up too. His feet now unburdened, each step felt lighter. The mountain wind passed over him, cool against his face. Pine needles whispered. White clouds drifted lazily across the ridge. And amid the sound of the temple bell ringing down the slope for the first time, he stopped complaining. He walked in silence and noticed. It was as if the mountain path had softened that day. There are times on a gentle afternoon when we still catch a gloomy look in someone's eyes. They have a stable job, a peaceful home, and someone who loves them. yet it's as if they live inside an invisible emptiness where joy never arrives. Some live surrounded by love, yet feel lonely. Live in peace, yet feel their hearts teetering on the edge of a cliff. Nothing around them is violent, but inside there is constant struggle, unease, and fatigue. That's because most of our exhaustion doesn't come from the road we're on, but from the stones we secretly hide in our minds. They aren't as loud as storms or as sharp as blades, but they quietly grind down every step, every day. We often think we're worn out because the work is too much, the pressure too great, life too harsh. But in truth, not every road is steep, not every day is stormy, and not everyone carries the same load. So what makes one person collapse in life while another continues calmly? The answer lies in how they think. A negative thought, when cradled day after day, becomes like a small stone in a shoe. At first it seems trivial, but the longer you walk, the more it burns and aches. Because of the pain, we start to see the entire path as an enemy. We see work as a burden, people as threats, and the future as a black abyss. The mind begins to build invisible walls to defend itself, then traps itself inside them. Sometimes we don't even realize we're doing it. An old criticism, a memory of failure, a cold glance, quietly becomes a thorn lodged in the heart, making every step afterward bleed. From that thorn, distorted thoughts arise. No one is sincere with me. I'm sure I'll fail again. People hate me. Nothing is trustworthy. In the Buddha's teachings, these streams of thought are called wrong thinking thoughts that veer away from reality and goodness, making the mind heavier and more distorted. Wrong thinking turns a single event into a fate, a mistake into an identity, a drop of rain into a whole storm. It makes us lose the ability to distinguish between what is truly happening and what our minds are projecting. By contrast, right thinking is the ability to view things with a mindful eye, not letting emotions drag us away, not letting the past color the present, not letting fear steer our decisions. Right thinking doesn't mean we must always think positive or force ourselves to be cheerful. It simply means thinking correctly, seeing the true nature, understanding the real causes, and choosing a response based on understanding, not blind reflex. Modern neuroscience has shown that the human brain has a negativity bias. It tends to remember and react more strongly to negative events than to positive ones. A single criticism can haunt the mind far more than a compliment. Without mindfulness, negative thoughts take root and become truths in our perception, even though they are merely distorted flashes of emotion. This is how the stones in our minds gradually grow, turning each day into a weary mountain climb. There was once a young woman standing by a lake, eyes red, hands trembling as she held a resignation letter. She repeated, "It's all because I'm not good enough. I'm a failure." That sentence was a verdict she passed on herself, but when asked more deeply, it turned out she had overcome hardship. Many times had strained herself to care for an ailing family and had helped coworkers in their time of need. Failure was only a small incident, yet her mind used it to define her entire worth. That is wrong thinking, taking one fragment as the whole, using one stumble to label a whole life. Those with right thinking are different. They don't deny failure or paint over sorrow, but they also don't let them define who they are. They tell themselves, "I stumbled, but I am not a failure. I am sad, but sadness is not the whole of me. This is only a difficult chapter, not the whole book. Right thinking doesn't sugarcoat, but it doesn't darken everything either. It looks at life with balance, clearly seeing both shadow and light, and then chooses to step toward the light, even if only in small steps. That's why those with right thinking can still cry and still feel sad, but they don't let those emotions drive their lives. This aligns with the Buddha's teaching. The mind precedes all things. Every word and deed begins with quiet thoughts in the head. A wholesome thought can redeem an overcast day. A distorted thought can ruin a peaceful life. When the mind is full of negative thoughts, we see everything through a warped lens. A piece of feedback becomes an insult. A small delay becomes proof of betrayal. A distracted glance becomes a sign of contempt. And then out of things that never truly happened, we create real suffering. To cultivate right thinking, we must first turn inward and observe the mind. Notice what fills our heads. Is it constant judgment? Dark predictions about the future? Old wounds repeated day after day? The mind is like a garden. If you don't tend it, weeds will grow. But if each day you sow wholesome seeds, gratitude, forgiveness, trust in the good, that garden will gradually bloom. Of course, in modern life, it's hard to keep the mind from being stained by negativity. The news is full of tragedies. Social media is full of comparisons and envy. Work pressure makes the head spin. But precisely because of that, right thinking is more necessary than ever. No one can control every external event, but everyone can choose how to think about them. And when we change how we think, the whole world changes in our eyes. In the same rain, a pessimist sees gloom. Someone with right thinking feels it as cool and refreshing. Facing the same failure, a negative person sees collapse. Someone with right thinking sees a lesson. Hearing the same criticism, a fragile person is hurt. Someone with right thinking adjusts and improves. When we learn to think correctly, we are no longer drowned by shifting emotions. We can still feel sad, angry, or tired, but we don't let those feelings steer our lives. We recognize emotions, then let them pass like clouds, instead of anchoring them in the mind like stones in a shoe. And then step by step, the road of life feels lighter. Not because the road is less steep, but because the mind is less heavy. That is the power of right thinking. A quiet power, not loud or showy, yet capable of transforming an entire life. When the mind thinks rightly, words become less sharp, actions less hasty, and the heart less hardened. Conversely, if we let negative stones remain in the mind every day, we'll feel like walking an endlessly rocky path, exhaustion, frustration, anger, until we are depleted. So pause for a moment. Look deeply within and ask, what stones are in my mind? Which thoughts are making each day heavier? And can I gently set them down so my feet can rest? Because sometimes the road doesn't need to change. We only need to take the stone out of the shoe. And we'll realize the path wasn't so hard. Our minds were simply too tired from clutching what wasn't needed. From that moment, each step becomes lighter each day, less heavy, because the mind has learned to think rightly and live gently. That is right thinking, the small key that opens a less rugged life, so we can walk through this world with a calm and weightless heart. Long ago, in a valley as quiet as a sleeping drop of water, there was an ancient monastery hidden behind rows of deep green pines. Each morning, mist covered the mossy stone steps, and the temple bell rang long like a silver thread tied to the heart, pulling stray thoughts back home. It was a place of refuge for more than 30 monks living simply 3 daily periods of practice, and at night, chant in sutras under the cold moonlight spread across roof tiles faded by time. Among the young newcomers to the monastery, one monk stood out the most. From the moment he had his head shaved, he amazed his brothers with his quick memory, clever responses, and words as gentle as a spring breeze passing through a peach garden. When visitors from many directions came to call, the teachers often smiled and said, "Let him go receive them. He's both polite and lively. After listening to him, the guests will surely be pleased." Indeed, each time he greeted visitors, he made them laugh with witty stories or nod with emotion at compliments soft as clouds. Everyone leaving the temple gate would turn back and exclaim, "That young novice will surely become a great Dharma teacher one day." At first, those words were like a whiff of incense drifting by, but gradually they settled like sweet honey in his heart. And like honey, the more there was, the stickier it became and the harder to shake off. He began to realize that whenever he said what was pleasing to hear, even just to satisfy others, their eyes lit up like lamps, and he received more praise. So his words grew ever more polished, ornate, and smooth, but also drifted farther from the truth. At first, his brothers felt only a faint discomfort. Then that discomfort grew into unease, because whenever someone asked for an opinion instead of giving sincere feedback, he tried to soothe their ears, afraid of offending them. Harmless, empty compliments like bright paper flowers without fragrance began to spread throughout the temple. Until one sweltering noon, an elderly layman from a neighboring village came to visit. After giving a Dharma talk that lasted nearly 2 hours, sweat beading on his forehead, he turned to the young monk with expectant eyes and asked, "What did you think of my talk today?" He hesitated. He knew clearly there were many parts of the talk that were tangled, repetitive, and even a few that were contrary to the scriptures. But seeing the layman's eyes like a child waiting for praise, he quickly put on a radiant smile, bowed, and said, "It was wonderful, sir. I've never heard anything better." The words were like pouring honey into the ear. The layman smiled with satisfaction, his silver beard quivering, eyes narrowing in pride. He left as light-footed as the wind. But a few days later, an older monk listened to the talk and gently told the layman that many parts were inaccurate. Hearing this, the man's face went pale, then flushed red. He snapped, "How dare you say that?" The young novice praised my talk as wonderful. From then on, rumors began to weave through the village. Some said the young monk flattered to curry favor with visitors. Others said the temple looked down on lay people. Still others whispered there was division within the monastery. Small conflicts like tiny sparks in dry straw smoldered and threatened to flare. One early autumn morning, yellow leaves covered the temple courtyard, and the young monk was summoned to the master's room. The room was small, like an old wooden box, just a bookshelf, a simple wooden table, and a clay teapot still steaming faintly. The master sat quietly by the window, warm light falling across a face lined like a map of time. When the young monk entered, he did not scold him. He simply poured a cup of tea, set it down before him, and spoke in a low voice without a trace of anger. Words are like honey, sweet, sticky, but if you consume too much, they can still cause decay. The young monk looked up and met the master's gaze. It wasn't stern, just quiet, like a deep lake with no visible bottom. Untrue words are the same. They sound pleasing at first, but over time they harm the heart. The sentence fell like a drop of ink into clear water, spreading outward in endless ripples. The young monk lowered his head. A strange feeling arose, not fear, but as if a mirror had just been wiped clean, reflecting himself back to himself. From that day on, whenever he was about to utter an untrue word, the tip of his tongue burned as if touched by fire. At first he thought it was an illusion, but it happened every time, just as he was about to release a pleasing but untrue line. His tongue felt pricked by needles. That sensation forced him to stop, to weigh each word, to ask himself, is this true? Will it make the listener clearer or only intoxicate them with illusion? Is it wholesome, like honey, or will it silently rot someone's heart? And then, day by day, bit by bit, he began to relearn how to speak. No more flowery words to gain favor, no more flattery to win praise. He spoke only what was correct, what was true words that might not make people cheer, but left a deep sense of relief. At first, a few people were unaccustomed to it. Some frowned at his frank feedback. Some quietly withdrew when they no longer heard sweet compliments. But new looks also appeared, eyes of gratitude, eyes suddenly awakened, eyes warm like finding a cool spring in a desert of false words. As time passed, the young monk became known not for eloquence, but for sincerity. He spoke less and more slowly, but each word fell like a drop of clear water into a still pond, stirring ripples that were gentle yet deep. And each time he walked through the quiet courtyard, watching sunlight rest on a fallen leaf, he would smile slightly, a breeze-light smile, because he understood. Truthful speech doesn't make people proud, but it brings peace to the heart. People often recall that story whenever they hear someone say, "It's just for fun," or "I'm just saying it to make them happy." Because the truth is, there is no word that is just for fun. Every word is a seed planted in another's heart. It may be a wholesome seed or a poisonous one, and every seed will sprout. Perhaps at first, no one sees anything. But over time, untrue words, however small, will quietly crack trust. Once someone discovers they were deceived by honeyed speech, they will not only doubt what they heard, they will also doubt the speaker. In the Buddha's teachings, this is called right speech, that is truthful and measured, not deceitful, not malicious, not divisive, not embellished. The Buddha taught words must be true, but also timely, well-intentioned, and skillfully delivered. Speak the truth, but not harshly. Speak correctly, but not to humiliate. Speak directly, but not to stab another's heart. Right speech is not merely saying what's correct, but speaking in a way that nourishes. Because truth, if spoken with anger, can become a weapon. But if spoken with compassion, truth becomes a medicine that heals. In modern life, words carry even more weight. A single social media post can drain a person completely. An offhand remark in a meeting can tear apart a whole team. A thoughtless criticism can push someone to the edge of despair. Conversely, just one word of encouragement, one sincere acknowledgement, can help someone rise amid ruins. Therefore, every word carries responsibility. Someone might ask, but if I don't say what pleases them, what if they feel hurt? In fact, telling the truth doesn't have to make others sad. Whether they feel hurt doesn't lie in the truth itself, but in how it's said. You can offer feedback like, "Your presentation wasn't good, it was hard to follow." Or you can say, "You had many great ideas. If you organize them more clearly, it will be even better." Both statements are true, but one makes the listener collapse. The other makes them want to stand up and do better. That is the art of right speech, telling the truth with kindness. When we keep right speech, we no longer need to embellish to be praised, lie to be loved, or flattered to be accepted. Because when words reflect the heart accurately, others can feel the sincerity. And sincerity moves people more powerfully than any honeyed phrase. On the other hand, those accustomed to living by false words will sooner or later grow weary, because they must remember what they said yesterday so as not to contradict themselves, because they must always wear a new mask for each new person, because they must live in fear of being exposed. Living like that, even surrounded by many people, the heart remains lonely. There was once a successful man respected by many on the outside who tossed and turned sleepless every night. He confessed that he had grown so used to saying what others wanted to hear that he could no longer tell what truly came from his own heart. Every word he spoke was like a dim shadow floating without roots, and so even amid applause and praise, he felt a chilling emptiness within. He sighed and said slowly, "I used to think that untrue words would make me loved, but now I realize people only loved the image I created, not my real self." The air grew heavy, because that is what many people today are experiencing. They just don't dare to say it aloud. Right speech doesn't just save others, it saves ourselves. When words become truthful, the mind becomes less scattered. No need for complicated explanations. No need for constant defensiveness. No need to live in fear that if they know the truth, they'll leave me. Right. Speech brings a quiet relief, like taking off a mask worn too long. To practice right speech, we don't need to talk a lot. We only need, before each word, to pause for a moment and ask, is this true? Is this necessary? Will this bring benefit and nurture what is wholesome? If all three answers are yes, speak. If not, silence is a compassionate choice, because silence is not weakness. Silence at the right time is kindness. In a family, if each person speaks sincerely without deceit, sarcasm, or backbiting, the atmosphere softens. At work, if everyone keeps right speech, speaking plainly, but not crudely, truthfully, but not cruelly, the team becomes stronger and more united. And in our own hearts, if we can speak truthfully to ourselves, neither sugarcoating nor darkening our minds, we'll be less conflicted, less tormented, less confused. Because in the end, words are not only sounds, they are mirrors of the mind. A clear mind speaks gently. An angry mind speaks with a blade. A grasping mind speaks slick, deceitful words. A sincere mind speaks slowly but deeply, and its words remain a long time in others' hearts. And when you learn to keep right speech, you will realize you don't need many words to have value. Just one truthful word can change an entire life. Back then, within the grounds of an ancient temple in the mountains, there was a small garden by the stream. The crystal-clear stream murmured day and night like a silver ribbon threading through a soft carpet of grass. Every noon, as the practice bell fell silent, sunlight pierced the tree canopies into golden streaks, and the garden became the place where the young novices gathered to sit, chat, and giggle like a flock of fledglings just out of class. The garden had only been planted recently. The saplings reached just to the knee, their slender trunks like ink strokes sketched on the earth, their leaves thin as silk, tender green shining in the sun like soft pieces of jade. A light breeze would pass, and the whole garden would quiver like a lake ruffled by tiny waves. They looked fragile, yet brimmed with a quiet, persistent vitality. One afternoon, while the brothers were busy picking up fallen leaves and piling them to burn, a small novice sat alone by the stream. His face was still childlike, his eyes bright with mischief. In his hand, he turned over a freshly fallen leaf as if pondering something. Then his eyes stopped on a tender branch close by. It was as thin as a chopstick, its leaves so young they trembled at the slightest touch, not out of dislike nor malice, just a passing curiosity, a childish prank like so many others. I wonder what sound it will make when it snaps, he thought. So his small hands reached out, gently grasped the branch, and bent it sharply. Crack. A tiny sound rang out crisp as a thread being pulled apart. The tender branch fell onto the mossy ground, lying there quietly, like a little life just cut off from living. The novice looked at the branch lying still, then suddenly burst into a giggle as if he had just discovered something very amusing. That carefree laugh rose in the peaceful garden as light as a wind chime, yet enough to awaken a certain gaze. From the stone path in the distance, the master was slowly approaching. Lean and thin, his brown robe lifted lightly in the wind, the slanting afternoon light casting a calm, rippleless lake look over his aged face. He stopped and took in the scene before him, a broken branch lying alone and a novice laughing innocently. The master did not scold or frown. He simply stepped closer, bent down to pick up the tiny branch, then handed it to the novice and said, his voice light as a breeze, "Take this branch to another patch of soil in the garden, dig a small hole and plant it again." The novice was a bit surprised, but obediently did as told. His small hands held the broken branch as he trotted across the grass, dug a shallow hole, set the branch in, and carefully covered it with soil. To him, it was a new game, an interesting task in the sunny afternoon. When he finished, he dusted off his hands and smiled, his eyes sparkling as if he had accomplished something grand. But a few days later, that branch began to droop. Its leaves turned yellow, curling like little fingers shrinking from the cold. The stem withered, its sap gone. Each morning, the novice stopped by to look at first, still hopeful, later in silence. By the seventh day, only a black dry twig remained stuck in the earth, tilting in the wind. That afternoon, as the sun was about to slip behind the ridge, the master passed by the garden again. He stopped, looked at the dead plant, and said softly, "You see, the tree has died, because when you broke it, you cut off its flow of life." His voice held no reproach, only a sadness like the evening bell dissolving into the valley. Every action, however small, plants a seed. That seed will bear fruit, as now you have just sown a death. Those words dropped into the novice's heart like a small stone falling onto a still lake, sending ripples spreading endlessly. He stood quietly, eyes on the dead twig, and a strange feeling rose within him. It was no longer a game, no longer a child's fleeting delight. It was a wistful pang, as if he had accidentally broken a precious vase. Evening fell. The garden breeze carried the smell of damp earth and decaying leaves. The novice bowed his head for a long time, then quietly left the garden, his feet placing light steps on each leaf as if afraid of hurting them. From that day on, whenever he passed the garden, he always walked very slowly. His eyes were no longer playful. They lingered quietly on each leaf and each tender branch, as if looking at a living being breathing. The saplings kept growing, swaying in the sunlight like green candles. And each time he saw them, his heart grew still, as if among the wind, a tiny crack still echoed somewhere, reminding him of the price of an action that seemed harmless, but had sown an ending. A tiny, living being, seemingly insignificant, was still living with all its might. And just one careless act was enough to end everything. People often don't realize they are creating karma, because we tend to think of karma as grand acts, killing, stealing, destroying. But in truth, karma begins with very small things: snapping a branch, a thoughtless kick at a mossy stone, a mindless shout, a flick of the hand that sends an ant into the water. They are small, but not invisible. Every action falls to the ground like a seed, and every seed will sprout. In the Buddha's teachings, this is called right action actions that are proper and wholesome, that do not harm life, that do not create suffering for any being. Right. Action is not only refraining from killing, it is living with compassion in every gesture and deed, because with every action we write an invisible line upon the world, and one day that line will be read back to us. Modern life makes us forget this. We rush, hurry, scramble living as if nothing we do truly leaves a trace. But the truth is, every decision we make, every choice we carry out, is quietly paving the road of our own karma. Choose to make money by deceit, you might grow rich quickly, but your heart grows cold. Choose to gain the upper hand, by stepping on others you might win for a while, but you will end up alone. Choose to amuse yourself by tormenting weaker creatures. You might laugh in the moment, but you will regret it for a very long time. Actions do not disappear when they end. They leave marks on the mind, and the mind will reflect them back into your life. There was once an older man with a worn look who came to the temple seeking peace. He said that in his youth he had hunted for a living. At first, it was because of poverty, but later, even when he had enough to eat, he continued out of habit. Now, in old age, every night he dreamed of the fearful eyes of wild animals staring at him. He didn't understand why in sleep he still heard gunshots and the cries of animals. That was not punishment from outside, but the fruit of karma, sprouting from the seeds he had sown. Though many years had passed, the harmful actions still cast their shadows in his mind, and his mind would not grant him peace. Therefore, right action is not only refraining from killing, but also refraining from harming. Do not harm the body. Do not harm the mind. Do not harm the living environment of any being. Each time you reach out to do something, pause a moment to ask, does this cause suffering to anyone? Does this take someone's life, trust, or joy? If someone did this to me, could I accept it? What you do not wish to receive, do not give. and what you wish to receive be the one to plant it first. Some might think, but if we're too soft-hearted, how can we survive in a harsh society? Compassion does not mean weakness. Compassion is the courage not to become a source of suffering, even when that would be easier. It is far easier to be hard, indifferent, and unfeeling. But it takes great strength to live gently in a jostling world. And it is precisely that gentleness that forms the true foundation of happiness. When you keep right action, you realize you don't need grand deeds to create wholesome karma. Just one small act done with compassion can change an entire day. Like gently lifting a caterpillar off the road so it won't be crushed. Like patiently explaining instead of scolding an apprentice. Like taking time to clean a public patch of land without needing anyone to know. These things are small, but they plant peaceful seeds in the mind, and those seeds will bloom into a peace more lasting than any success. Conversely, if you grow accustomed to careless actions, you will find your heart growing heavier. Because each time you cause harm, the mind leaves a scratch, and when the scratches pile up, the heart grows calloused, no longer moved by anyone's pain. That is when compassion dies, and with it, the joy of living. A person without compassion, even if wealthy, is still lonely. Even surrounded by many, they feel as cold as standing in a desert. A Zen master said to his student, "You may be intelligent, talented, more outstanding than others, but if your actions lack compassion, everything you build will be like a castle on sand. A light wind of karmic result is enough to blow it away, for karma is not measured by achievements, but by the effect your actions have on the life around you. If each step you take makes the earth bloom, that is right action. If each step makes the leaves wither, that is wrong action." In modern society where everyone races to get ahead, right action is all the more important. The more successful you are, the greater the impact of each action, and without mindfulness, a single wrong decision can bring suffering to many. A business person who seeks profit by exploiting workers' profits rise, but people's hearts run dry. A manager who competes by slandering colleagues, they may win, but no one truly trusts them. A parent who uses the rod to teach the child may obey, but fear and resentment are planted in their heart. All of this will return. Karma does not vanish. It only waits for time to sprout. Therefore, right action is being aware of the consequences of each deed and choosing actions that do not harm. Not acting for the ego, not acting for short-term gain, not acting just to win or lose. Acting for goodness, for life, for compassion. Even if small, be genuine. Even if slow, be steady. Only actions born of compassion can stand the test of time. Right actions do not need noise. They are like drops of water seeping into the soil, quiet, yet reviving the earth. Wrong actions, no matter how dazzling, are like a great blaze, brilliant for a moment, then leaving only ashes. In the end, life does not measure us by what we achieved, but by what we left in others' hearts. And if each action leaves behind ease and peace, that is right action. Slow down a little. Look at your own hands and ask, are the things I do each day nourishing or destroying? Do the things I touch after I pass by live stronger or weaker? With each action, what karma am I writing? Because a human life, when all is said and done, is only a long chain of small actions. And if each small action is right, an entire life becomes a verse about compassion. Long ago, in a riverside village with a small ferry dock and bamboo groves rustling all year round, lived a butcher famous throughout the area. He was as sturdy as a temple pillar, his steps heavy as hammers, his hands so strong and quick that the blade in his grip flashed like lightning. At dawn, when dew still clung to thatched roofs, his butcher shop was already lit red. The sound of sharpening shht, shht, blended with roosters announcing morning and the clatter of pots and cutting boards in the market. His wooden-handled butcher's knife, soaked for years with the sweat of his palms, shone enough to reflect a strip of sky. Each day he brought down dozens of living beings, pigs, goats, chickens, ducks. The wooden block drank blood until it darkened like bitter wine. The earthen floor bore streaks of wash water carrying the fishy smell trickling into a narrow drain. His house was the grandest in the hamlet. The granary was full. Bunches of garlic and onions hung from the walls like clusters of dried stars. In the corner of the yard stood a glossy brown jar of soybean paste. Villagers came in crowds to buy meat, but when they met him, they bowed and stepped aside. Greetings for him were short and mumbled. They respected his strength and feared his blade more than they truly respected him. Whenever children passed his shop, they would tilt their baskets and hurry past, not daring to look inside. No one knew that when the market emptied, the furnace died down and the door slammed shut with a boom, the rich man's house suddenly felt wide and cold. The butcher lay on a bamboo cot, hands behind his head, the ceiling still as water, yet sleep would not come. Whenever he closed his eyes, he saw tied-up eyes looking at him, round black, trembling, glistening with tears, as if crying. He heard groans rising from the depths of his dreams, faint at first, then clearer, pulling him up in the middle of the night. Some nights he would bolt upright, heart pounding like war drums, sweat pouring like bathwater, his wrists still feeling the rope chafing the skin. On the shelf, the knife angled just so, catching a thin line of light that made him start thinking he saw a smear of blood on the blade. He would jump up, fetch water, and wash knife and block in the dead of night, scrubbing until his fingertips trembled, yet the stench seemed lodged in his lungs. At first he reassured himself, "I work to live. Everyone has to live." That sentence was a thick shield that got him through the hungry years. But strangely, once he had enough to eat and wear, that shield grew thinner. His hands were still swift, his blade still razor sharp, but each cut now carved a deeper mark inside. Once, while chopping quickly, he saw a goat turn its head. Its gaze paused on his face for a moment, silent and bewildered. That look followed him all day, and in the evening it stood waiting on the threshold, quiet as a question. One day during the humid south wind season, the river swelled with ripples like fish scales, and the village held a big market fair. Amid the noisy buying and selling, a patched-robed ascetic stopped by planting his bamboo staff under the eaves of a tea stall. People gathered, curious to hear the teaching. The butcher in the middle of splitting ribs looked up and saw that figure, suspicion mixed with interest. Let's see what he says. He wiped his hands, took off his apron, and squeezed into the back of the crowd. The ascetic spoke very little. His voice was low and clear, like water dripping evenly into a clay jar. Every trade feeds the body, but it is also feeding the mind, the listeners murmured. The butcher looked up. The ascetic's gaze moved across the crowd, resting on no one, as if passing through everyone. If your trade feeds the body but kills compassion, then even if the body lives, the mind has already died. 2 short sentences, yet like an arrow, piercing the iron armor he had worn for so long. It didn't draw blood, but it chilled his chest. All afternoon, he stood silently behind the counter. The thud of blade on block suddenly sounded heavy. The stench grew harsher. The busy chatter of buying and selling felt strange and far away. When the sun poured over the bamboo grove, he washed the knife clean, dried it, and set it on the table. For the first time in years, his hand didn't reach for it again. That night, the house was as quiet as a swamp after rain. He sat a long while on the porch, listening to crickets in intervals. Near midnight, he went to bed. Strangely, his eyelids felt heavy, as if someone had set a small stone on them. Sleep came deep as a well. No cries, no terrified eyes, no streaks of blood flashing by. In the morning, he woke stretched and felt something open in his chest like a tender leaf. He murmured, "I just had my first full night's sleep in years." The next day, the butcher shop did not open. Instead, he carried out a wooden table from the storehouse, cleaned it carefully, and set it under the eaves. In the corner of the yard, he lit a stove. The smell of cooking smoke mixed with rice flour and roasting sesame, rich and warm. He kneaded dough. Hands once used to gripping a knife fumbled with a wooden ladle. Neighbors peered in and burst out laughing. A butcher making cakes who would eat that. A man who killed for years, trying to act gentle now. He only smiled and said nothing. The fire hummed softly. The first batches were clumsy, lopsided, burnt at the edges, some undercooked. He tasted, grimaced, tossed them, and kneaded anew. By the 5th batch, the dough rose evenly. The cakes were golden like late sunlight. The fragrance drew neighborhood children to a stop. They hesitated, "Sir, how much for one?" He blinked for a moment, then answered quietly, "Half the price of a tail of meat from the other day." His broad hand set a cake on a banana leaf and handed it over. The child took a bite. Their eyes lit up delicious. That single delicious brushed his eardrum like a raindrop falling into cracked, dry earth. He said nothing but felt his throat grow warm. In the days that followed, the little cake stall slowly gained customers. First the children, then mothers, then a few boatmen stopped for something warm in the early morning. Some villagers still sneered, but the wary looks lessened. In the yard, the line where knives once hung rusted away, replaced by strings of cooling cakes scented with molasses and sesame. Inside the old butcher block, scrubbed clean, became a dough-rolling table. Hands once used to the force of chopping learned to lift and shape the cake's edge gently. One afternoon, the ascetic returned, standing at the eaves, watching the thin gray smoke. The butcher hurriedly wiped his hands on his apron and bowed, embarrassed. The ascetic merely smiled. He didn't ask about knives or cutting boards, just picked up a cake and broke it in half. The steam blurred his eyes. He took a bite and nodded. Sweet enough, warm enough. The butcher understood some praise doesn't stick like honey, it soaks in like water. That night, he slept peacefully. In his dreams, there were no rope-bound fences, no gleaming blade. Instead, there were round cakes like the mid-autumn moon resting side by side, giving off a quiet aroma. He walked through a wide field, brushed soft rice panicles, and listened to wind through thatched roofs. Waking his chest felt light as if a stone had been lifted out. Time passed, and the story of the butcher who bakes became a subject of children's giggles, then a tale told at the ferry dock. Some still shook their heads. Changing jobs won't matter. The karma is already sown. But those close to him noticed one thing. His face was less tense, his eyes less dull, his gait less heavy. He didn't talk about karma like a verdict. He simply steadily changed each movement of his hands, putting down the knife, picking up the ladle, setting aside the grease pan tending the fire, swapping the smell of blood for the smell of sweets. Each morning when making the first batch, he stood still for a moment, listened to the gentle sizzle of oil, and heard a whisper in his mind. Every trade feeds the body, but it is also feeding the mind. Early winter, the river receded, exposing a stretch of golden sandbar. He brought a few trays of cakes to the ferry, setting them on a wooden plank. Passers-by stopped to buy and praised the aroma. At noon, a frail old woman counted her change with trembling hands. Just a small one for me. He chose a nicely risen cake and handed it over. She took a small bite. Her eyes glistened. "It warms my stomach." Those two words, "warms my stomach," made his throat tighten. He suddenly understood why he would sleep well that night, not because of sales, but because an elderly belly had been warmed by a cake he made. Back home, the late sun slanted. Flour dust still clung to his nails. On the shelf, the butcher's knife still lay there like a frozen piece of the past. It no longer frightened him. He simply wrapped it in cloth, set it at the back of a cupboard, and kept it out of sight. His hand touched the bundle. He bowed his head as if greeting an old companion who had carried him through hard days, then rose, went to the kitchen, and lit the fire. Night fell. The scent of cakes lingered in the house. He lay down, listening to the river breathing lightly past the sand. Outside, a lone dog barked, then fell silent. Inside, sleep arrived without knocking. It crossed the porch softly, sat beside him, placed a hand over his eyes, and closed them. No more terrified eyes appeared. No more cries from the depths of night. Only the oven's warmth seeping into every pocket of darkness. At dawn, he stood under the eaves and drew a long breath. The smell of toasted sesame was like a gentle sutra. He whispered, just loud enough for himself, "Last night, I slept deeply again." At the riverside, the water was flat as a mirror. Inside the man, too, there was a lake that had just stilled. And from that day on, each cake he set on the tray not only fed bodies passing through the market, but also quietly nourished something inside his heart. Something long ago killed off, now returned small, but as steady as a sprout, pushing up through soil. Each time the story is retold, listeners fall quiet because it reminds us a livelihood doesn't just feed the body, it quietly shapes the mind. Modern society teaches us to choose jobs by salary, prestige, and speed of advancement. Few ask, does this job pull me farther from compassion? Does this job make me accustomed to causing harm? Does this job take more from others than it gives? If a job makes us more skilled, but more cold, richer, but more anxious, more famous, but more lonely, then what is the real price? In the Buddha's teachings, this is called right livelihood, earning a living through an upright trade that does not involve killing, does not create suffering, does not harm life, and does not destroy people's hearts. Right livelihood doesn't demand renouncing everything, nor does it require ascetic hardship. It only asks that we earn our living while keeping the mind clean. Because every coin we earn bears the imprint of karma. Money from deceit, lies, exploitation, no matter how much, is money stained with blood. Money from nurturing, building, protecting, even if little, is money that smells fresh and clean. There was once someone who worked in advertising. She said she had made a lot of money by creating campaigns that led people to buy things they didn't need. With money, they didn't have to chase images that weren't real. The more successful she became, the emptier she felt. She lost sleep every night, not from pressure, but from feeling like she was deceiving the whole world. After a retreat, she quit and became a teacher for poor children. Less money, a smaller home, an older car, but a more peaceful heart. She said, "For the first time in years, I feel my work heals instead of harms. Not everyone has to abandon their old job like the butcher or that woman in the story. But anyone can work with the spirit of right livelihood that is in any job. Keep 3 things. 1. Do not harm living beings. Do not directly kill nor indirectly abet killing. Do not destroy the living environment of humans or any other beings. 2. Do not harm people's hearts. Do not deceive, exploit, or take advantage of others' weakness for profit. Do not sell things that make people addicted, dependent, or that damage health or mind. 3. Do not lose yourself. Do not let money blur your ethics. Do not let ambition harden your heart. Do not let the urge to win turn work into a battlefield. Those with right livelihood don't need to flee the world. They can still be merchants, lawyers, doctors, engineers, teachers, artists. But with every decision they ask, does this create real value? Does this harm anyone? When it's done, can I sleep soundly? If the answer is, I can sleep soundly, that's a sign of right livelihood. Because in the end, the worth of a job isn't in the money, but in its impact on our mind and the life around us. Today's world is very good at praising success, but rarely asks by what means. Some climb very high, but behind them lie exhausted bodies, broken relationships, and hurt people. On the surface, they win, but deep down, they don't dare stop and look at themselves even once, because they know that if they looked, they would see their hands stained. Right. Livelihood isn't measured by salary. It's measured by the cleanliness of the conscience that earns it. A street sweeper who loves cleanliness may be happier than an owner whose heart is full of schemes. A small repairer fixing old items for the poor may sleep better than someone who builds a mansion by seizing land from the people. Peaceful sleep is a reward reserved for those who live by a trade that causes no suffering. Once a group of students about to graduate were advised, don't just ask, how much does this job pay? Ask, will this job make me despise myself? Because when work turns someone into a version of themselves, they never wanted to be, all fame becomes meaningless. And if a job demands constant lying, ignoring suffering, and stepping on others to survive, the price isn't paid in money, but in one's very soul. People with right livelihood are usually not loud. They work quietly, without scrambling or showing off. But each step they take leaves life behind, not destruction. Everything they create nourishes, not devastates. Each achievement brings shared joy, not someone else's loss. These are the people who can sleep peacefully each night, not because they have few worries, but because they owe no one blood or tears. If everyone chose an upright livelihood, society would change. No more industries grown rich on suffering. No more systems built on deceit. No more successes paid for with humanity. Because each of us contributes to the common current of karma. And when each person works with a clean heart, that current grows clear, not just for oneself, but for the whole world. That is right livelihood, not lofty, not mysterious. Just making a living in a way that at the end of the day you can look straight into the mirror without shame, earning money without killing compassion. Because if you must trade away compassion to have everything, then having everything is having nothing. And when you choose a job that feeds the body without killing the mind, you'll find each day's labor is no longer a burden, but part of the path to liberation. Behind the ancient mountainside temple, there was a small courtyard paved with blue-green stones mottled with moss. In the corner of the yard, beside a stand of old bamboo, whispering in the wind, stood an ancient stone-rimmed well, its rim worn smooth by generations of hands. Next to the well sat a large flat rock, nearly as big as a double mat, dark gray like the back of a turtle that had slept through many seasons of sun and rain. Every morning, when dew still clung to the leaves, the young novices lined up at the well to draw water. From the mouth of a bamboo dipper sometimes when pouring into the bucket, sometimes with a light flick of the wrist, sometimes as it swung, tiny droplets separated and fell onto the exact same spot on the rock. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was so small that anyone in a hurry would miss it, but if you stopped, you could hear the steady rhythm like the steps of an invisible clock. The rock lay there motionless, cold as a winter wind slipping through a brown robe. It had been there a very long time, so long that the elder teachers only smiled. When I first came to the temple, it was already lying there like that. Through many rainy seasons and many springtimes of peach blossoms, the rock never moved, as if the entire back courtyard revolved around it. One small novice often came here to sit. He was thin with freshly shorn, bristly hair and ears pink from the morning wind. Whenever he finished a section of the sutra, he would bring his book to the well squat beside the rock and watch the slender drops fall on the exact same spot. Propping his chin in his hands, he sighed like a grown-up. When will it ever bore through a rock this big? Then he'd open the sutra again. After only a few lines, his eyelids grew heavy and he yawned loudly. He scratched his head and flipped a few pages. The black characters on the yellowed paper began to drift like little fish. He closed the book and sighed. I keep studying and never improve. I'm not as good as the other brothers. In the afternoons, when the sun slanted across the mountain's shoulder, he still sat there, listening to the even tap-tap, listening to the bamboo rubbing and rustling like a lullaby, yet feeling heavy inside like stone. He saw his brothers memorize the sutras quickly and sit in meditation so still. As for himself, after a short while his legs went numb. After a few lines, the words tangled. The sadness was like an underground spring unseen by others, but filling up day by day. One day, the sky was clear as water, and a cool wind blew up from the valley. After the midday lesson, the master walked slowly along the back corridor, fingering his bead's eyes, looking far. He saw the novice slumped by the well, the sutra resting on his knees, his eyes as sad as a moonless night. The master stopped. He didn't call out right away. He stood for a moment listening to the falling water, then asked, "How far have you read?" Startled, the boy fumbled the folded page open and answered timidly, I've only read a little, sir. The characters are so hard. When I finish reading, I forget again." The master didn't scold him. He tilted his head toward a rock and said, "Go to the well and look at the surface of that stone." Bewildered, the boy stepped closer. For the first time, instead of looking at the whole rock, he bent low and squinted at the exact spot where the drops fell. Right there, contrary to what he'd always assumed, it wasn't flat at all, but a round, deep hollow, smooth and polished like the inside of a small bowl. The color of the stone at that spot was lighter than the surroundings, glinting in the sunlight, as if someone had just brushed on a layer of clear oil. He touched it with a fingertip, smooth, cold, and deeper than he expected. His finger sank in up to a knuckle. "Do you see?" The master spoke slowly, each word seeming to soak into the earth. A rock that seems immovable still has to yield to tiny droplets of water, not because the water is strong, but because it is persistent. The boy looked up, eyes wide. In his mind, he suddenly saw the mornings, the noons, the afternoons, how many times he had sat here hearing tap, tap, without noticing. The drops were so alike as to be boring, each one so small it was almost laughable, and yet they had carved a deep hollow into this great stone. Your mind is the same. The master continued gently. There's no need to rush, no need to surpass anyone. You only need steady effort each day. In the end, what seemed impossible will come to be. The words fell into the back courtyard, and suddenly every sound grew clearer. Crickets at the bamboo roots, wind passing the well's mouth, the steady rhythm of falling drops. The novice stood there a long time, his hand on the hollow feeling, as if he were touching an old secret the garden had kept for years. From that day, his habits changed. In the morning, he rose half a watch earlier and went to the well to help draw water before the wooden fish sounded. Each time he poured, he tried to make the last drop fall onto the same spot. Tap, tap. He smiled, one more drop. For sutra study, he no longer tried to swallow a whole chapter at once. He divided it 5 sentences at a time, 10 times a day. Each time he finished 5 sentences, he closed the book, went to the well, placed his hand on the hollow, and whispered, "One more drop." At first, he was still sleepy. But just as his eyelids were about to fall, the soft tapping seemed to pull him up. "Try one more drop." He splashed his face with the well's cold water, felt his eyes clear, and returned to study. One day, a heavy rain fell. The backyard blurred into a white curtain, and drops sprayed off the roof tiles. He stood under the eaves, watching, saw the rock soaked through the hollow, brimming like a tiny eye of a well. He thought downpours are easy to see. But this rock wasn't worn down by heavy rain. It was worn by small drops falling on the same spot for many years. With that, he went back inside and read 5 more sentences. Each day a handful of drops, each drop a breath, each breath a small step past discouragement. His brothers no longer saw him sitting and sighing in the backyard. Instead, they saw him move slowly but steadily, sit still and alert. When chanting, his voice was deeper. He didn't rush to keep up with those ahead, nor fear those behind catching up. At night, before sleep, he went to the well again, laid his hand on the hollow, and quietly counted the falling beats. The later the night, the clearer the sound. He realized that amid the insects and the leaves, there was a steady rhythm that never tired. Month after month passed. One morning when the sun was a bowl's width over the mountain peak, the master passed the backyard and saw the boy already seated by the well eyes, bright as water. The master stood behind him without calling. The boy turned and smiled. "Master, I finished memorizing yesterday's section." The master nodded and didn't praise much. He simply gestured. The boy understood, opened the sutra, and read. His voice flowed evenly, each word as clear as a drop falling into the heart. When he finished, he didn't cheer or look around for approval. He just placed his hand on the hollow and silently said, "Thank you." On another day, guests came to the temple. During the evening practice, everyone sat in meditation. The boy had always found it hard to sit still. His legs often fell asleep and his back quickly ached. That day, he closed his eyes and placed his attention on the breath. In his mind, the tap, tap appeared like a gentle clock. Each time his mind wandered, he brought it back to the exact drop point, the tip of his nose where the breath touched. One drop, another drop. Before long, the session was over. The bell rang. He opened his eyes, surprised. His legs weren't numb. His back wasn't sore. Not because he was stronger, but because his mind had stopped demanding finish now. News of him didn't spread beyond the temple walls. No one tells a story so ordinary. But within these grounds, something small yet lasting changed each day. The hollow on the well's stone grew a little deeper. Those with keen eyes could see the rim glimmer like a new crescent moon. One late season afternoon, cold on the way, gray clouds roaming above the ridge, the master passed the backyard again. He stopped at the well, watching the boy pour with the bamboo dipper. The last drop fell onto the same spot, making a sound very small, yet clear. The master asked, "What do you hear?" The boy replied, "I hear the water falling, and I hear my mind not giving up." The master smiled, a very light smile like bamboo fronds brushing. "Good. Let each day be a drop. Don't let any day run dry." That night, the north wind slid through the cracks of the doors, cutting cold. The boy curled under a coarse blanket, but before sleep, he remembered one thing. Today, he had finished the last 5 lines of the new section, had sat still for the full period, had helped the kitchen light the fire. 3 drops. He smiled in the dark. Warm enough. Time tends to walk on cat's feet, quiet, soft, and sudden. A year passed like a long breath. One early morning, he returned to the well. The hollow was now deeper than a knuckle. Its surface was polished smooth, a clear bead of water gathered there. He leaned over and saw a face still his own, but with ripened eyes and corners of the mouth that complained less. He placed both palms on the stone cold and familiar. In his heart, a new intention arose today. One more drop, not to be fast, not for anyone's approval, but because the rock had taught him how to walk with perseverance. And somewhere deeper than stone, there was another rock. Old habits, old discouragements, old sighs, also wearing away little by little to the rhythm of tap, tap. That never tires. When the morning bell rang through the valley, a thread-like ribbon of smoke rose from the refectory. The novice stood up, hugged the sutra to his chest, and walked slowly toward the main hall. Behind him, The well was still clear, the bamboo still sang, and the rock lay as usual, except for one thing. In the center of that flat surface, a tiny, deepening hollow kept growing in a way no one noticed day by day. Yet nothing could stop, and within him, a similar hollow was opening to words, to breath, to quiet, not because the mind was strong, but because it was persistent, not to surpass anyone, but because he had learned to follow a steady rhythm, one more drop and one more, until what seemed impossible became what had been done. I often remember the image of the rock and the water drops whenever I see someone give up halfway. Because most people don't fail for lack of talent, they fail for lack of perseverance. They don't lose at the starting line. They lose at the 10th step because they thought they had to reach the finish by the 5th. In the Buddha's teaching, this is called right effort, steady, well-directed effort, neither lazy nor extreme, not burning oneself out for the sake of results, and not giving up out of fear of difficulty. Effort isn't about doing the most. Effort is doing it regularly and correctly, little by little each day, without quitting. Because the path of transforming the mind is not like setting off fireworks. It doesn't need to flare bright. It needs to burn steadily and not go out. Modern life is causing many people to misunderstand effort. We are taught to give it everything, to charge ahead like a storm, to succeed as fast as possible. So many live as if sprinting on a journey longer than a lifetime. They work non-stop, study, non-stop, compete, non-stop. Then they burn out, burn up, and give up. But the truth is, no one needs to burn themselves to light the world. Just step steadily, firmly in the right direction, and the light will spread on its own. A young man freshly graduated came seeking guidance. He said he wanted to practice to live mindfully but couldn't keep it up. I meditate for 3 days, then stop. I eat moderately for a week, then let it slide. I study the sutra for a few sessions, then grow bored. Maybe I'm not suited to the path. The Zen master simply asked, "How many times a day do you brush your teeth?" "Twice, sir." "Do you ever skip?" "Never." The master smiled. Practice is like brushing your teeth. No need for breakthroughs, just consistency. You don't need to awaken every session. You only need to make the mind a little cleaner than yesterday. The young man sat in silence for a long time. That is right effort. Not flashy, not something others need to notice, not chasing achievements. It is simply planting one wholesome seed in the mind each day and patiently tending it. Transformation doesn't arrive in a day. It comes from 1,000 small days. Many people think, but if I go slowly, won't I fall behind? In truth, there is no behind, because the spiritual path is not a race. No one wins, no one loses. Each person is walking their own journey, and the only thing to ensure is not to stop. Like the drop falling on the rock. It doesn't compare itself to other drops. It doesn't try to fall faster. It is faithful to its own point of impact and thus bores through the stone. Effort is not blind striving either. If effort is misdirected, the harder you push, the farther you stray. Some work without eating or sleeping, thinking it's diligence, but lose health, family, and inner peace. Some practice day and night thinking it's effort, but only to prove they're better than others, ending up inflating the ego. That isn't right effort, that's extremism. And any extremism collapses. Right effort is effort with mindfulness. It's knowing to rest when tired, slow down when needed, step back to reassess direction. It's working with a clear heart, not from fear of falling behind. Effort born of fear drains the mind. Effort born of understanding makes the mind calmer the more it does. There was a gardener at the temple who quietly pulled a few weeds each day, watered a few roots, added a bit of compost, trimmed a few dry branches. People looked and thought at that rate, when will it become a garden? Yet a few months later, it bloomed lush and fragrant like a small paradise. When asked his secret, he smiled kindly. "I don't do a lot, I just don't skip days." That seemingly simple line contains the essence of right effort. In a world that glorifies big leaps and dazzling feats, people forget that life isn't built from leaps, but from countless steady steps. It is consistency that quietly creates the deepest, most lasting change. To cultivate right effort, you don't need to start with something grand. Set goals within reach. Don't attempt 100 practices at once. Add one small good thing each week. Small things are easier to keep, and what lasts is real strength. Also, set a steady rhythm. Choose a fixed time each day to practice, like the drop that always falls on the same point, wearing through the stone over time. And most importantly, don't demand quick results. Flowers don't bloom because we pull the petals. The mind doesn't become calm because we force it. Tend it daily with patience. One day it will bloom on its own, quietly, gently, and as steadily as spring returning after a long winter. When you live with right effort, you discover something remarkable. Difficulties are no longer so frightening, because you don't have to defeat them today. You only need to take one small step toward them each day. And those small steps become a long road, like the drop of water, not loud, not hurried, but in the end it pierced the stone. And once the mind grows used to steady perseverance, life becomes lighter. No more frantic rushing, no more fear of being left behind, no more self-torment with goals beyond your strength. You still walk, still, work still, live fully, but with ease, stability, and deep trust. Because you know that if you don't give up today, tomorrow will surely be different. And that is right effort. On the eastern mountainside, where dawn always arrives earlier than anywhere else, there was a small hut nestled at the forest's edge. Its roof was thatched with dry grass, its walls made from darkened wooden planks aged by the years. Whenever the early wind blew, the grass roof rustled like the forest's whisper, and a thin wisp of smoke from the stovepipe drew a slender white line across the sky like a brushstroke. In that hut lived an old woodcutter, quietly almost forgotten by the world at the foot of the mountain. Each day, when darkness still clung to the treetops and morning dew veiled the ground, he was already up. The small oil lamp cast light on the blotchy wooden wall, illuminating his thin figure as he tightened the wraps around his ankles, getting ready for a long day. While the villagers were still asleep, he quietly left the hut, slung his old axe over his shoulder, and stepped into the dew-soaked forest. At daybreak, the forest was so quiet, you could hear his footsteps on the fallen leaves. Birds had not yet called, the wind had not yet risen, only the steady sound of his axe rang out each stroke true clean, like the cut of a skilled craftsman's shears. He split each log, stacked them into bundles, tied them neatly with hemp rope, then carried them down to the market at the mountain's foot. That path was winding and slippery. He had to wade across 3 streams to reach the place. The water was skin cold, the stones underfoot slick as if covered in moss, every step demanding steadiness. Yet for years no one ever heard him complain. The load of firewood weighed heavy on his shoulders, but his manner was always calm, as flowing water neither hurried nor irritable, never weary. His face was composed, his eyes gentle like headwater spring, clear and quiet. Each stroke of his axe fell evenly and neatly, as if an invisible rhythm were running through his every motion, not fast, not slow, not careless, not rushed. Sometimes a squirrel would peek out from a crevice and then disappear, but he continued his work, undisturbed, unstartled. Time seemed to dissolve around him, leaving only steady breathing and the far-off drumbeat of wood cracking beneath the blade. One day, when the first sunlight of the morning was still threading through the leaves, a Zen master passed through the forest. His steps were unhurried, his brown robe lifting lightly in the breeze. He stopped beneath a pine and watched the woodcutter work for a long while. The master's gaze was quiet, as if listening for something sounding within those seemingly ordinary movements. At last, he spoke softly. "You are living in meditation." The woodcutter started his brows knitting. He braced the axe on the ground, looked up at the stranger and said in surprise, "Meditation? I'm only splitting firewood." The Zen master smiled, his look kind like the early sun filtering through leaves. "Precisely because you are only splitting firewood. That is meditation. Each of your strokes is wholly present. The mind does not run to the past. The mind does not worry about the future. The mind is only here with the axe stroke, with the breath, with the sound of wood cracking beneath the blade. That is meditation." The woodcutter stood still, his hand still on the haft, as if a small door had just opened inside him. A light breeze stirred, carrying a few yellow leaves that twirled in the air and settled at his feet. He looked at the leaves, then at the Zen master, said nothing, only nodded slightly. The master went on his way, his brown robe disappearing among the tall trunks. The woodcutter returned to his work, but from that day on, each stroke of his axe, each breath joining the sound of the blade, became lighter, deeper, and clearer in his eyes, as if for the first time he truly knew he was alive in each moment. That story, though, heard long ago, lingers like a small bell in the heart, because it reminds us mindfulness is not withdrawing from life, not hiding in deep mountains, not shutting oneself behind walls of silence, but being fully present in each moment of this very life. Many people think meditation means sitting cross-legged, eyes closed in a silent room with no noise and no interruptions, as if only by separating from life can one touch peace. But in truth, meditation does not lie in posture. It lies in attitude. For if the mind is still scattered, still running endlessly back to the past or racing into the future, then even sitting as still as a statue is not meditation. Conversely, if the mind can rest in the present, knowing clearly what one is doing, breathing, stepping, seeing, hearing, then whether splitting wood, carrying water, washing dishes, sweeping the floor, caring for a child, driving, working, all can become meditation. Mindfulness does not require leaving life. It is living more deeply in each moment of life. When the mind is fully present, Ordinary tasks grow quietly luminous. Small actions become gentle notes in life's symphony. And when we can live like that, peace is no longer something to search for. It naturally exists in every breath. In the Buddha's teaching, this is called right mindfulness, aware, clearly knowing what one is doing, thinking and feeling in each moment, not chasing the mind stream of imaginings, not letting the past bind you, not letting the future pull you away. Mindfulness is not trying to eliminate thoughts, but knowing you are thinking, not extinguishing emotions, but knowing you are feeling. Just knowing clearly, the mind has already begun to brighten. And when the mind is bright, suffering has no chance to take root. Look around at the modern world, and you will see, for lack of mindfulness, people are increasingly exhausted. They eat without knowing they're eating, heads buried in screens. They walk without knowing they're walking, the mind running miles ahead of the body. They talk without hearing anything, only waiting for their turn to speak. They sleep while the mind still spins with tomorrow's meetings. The body is here, but the mind is absent, and it is that absence that keeps people from ever feeling at peace, even amid abundance. Some live as if chased by their own time, eating breakfast while thinking of the afternoon meeting. In the meeting, already planning next week, lying down at night frantically rewriting the next morning's to-do list in their head. Moments pass, not to be lived, but to prepare for the next moment. And then they don't understand why they're always drained, even when nothing that bad is happening. In fact, that fatigue doesn't come from workload, but from a mind that has never rested. When the mind is always being pulled forward and is never here, and now it is like a machine that never stops even to breathe. Many people need only stop for 5 minutes, close their eyes, breathe deeply, and count each breath, and they burst into tears. Not from sadness, but from realizing it has been too long since they were truly present in any moment at all. Mindfulness is not complicated. It is simply the ability to live with this moment as if it were everything, not letting the mind run to the past or rush into the future. And when you can rest in the present, even for a few minutes a day, the mind grows lighter than months of wandering. Because sometimes what we need isn't more time, but to return to each moment passing quietly by. Mindfulness doesn't make work disappear or pressure melt away, but it keeps us from being drowned by them. For when the mind rests in the present, we see clearly that most worries are invented by the mind, not reality. The past no longer exists. The future has not arrived. Only this moment is real. And if we live fully in this moment, there is no need to run from life, because life was never chasing us. Someone might ask, but how can we keep mindfulness amid overwhelming work? In truth, mindfulness doesn't need to be separated from work. It can be woven into the work itself. Just do one thing at a time and do it with your full attention. When washing dishes, only wash. Dishes feel the warm water. The soap bubbles the movement of your hands. When eating rice, only eat rice. Notice the fragrance, texture, and sweetness of the grains. When listening to someone, only listen. Don't rush to react. Don't judge. Don't interrupt. Mindfulness needs no extra time. It only needs you fully present in the time you already have. The outer world never stops moving, but mindfulness creates an inner stillness. That stillness is like a tree trunk in a storm. It doesn't stop the wind, but it isn't blown away. When the mind stops, we see things are not as tangled as imagined. It's only because the mind runs too fast that we stumble. You don't always need to sit for hours to call it practice. Sometimes pausing for just 3 breaths is enough to bring the mind back. 3 breaths may seem too brief, but they can anchor us like a mooring rope, keeping us from being swept away by life's chaos. Just 3 breathing in, knowing you are breathing in. Breathing out, knowing you are breathing out. When finished, knowing you have finished a breath. It sounds simple, but truly being present in each breath requires complete awareness. No one can lose themselves while truly inhabiting each breath. The breath is the bridge between body and mind, between what is happening outside and the deep inner world. Whenever the mind begins to stir, just return to the breath, and you will feel as if you've set down an invisible burden. If practiced regularly, even just a few times a day, the mind will gradually change, less hurried, less distracted, less anxious. Then amid busyness, you will still have a peaceful place to return to, right in your own breathing. Mindfulness also helps reveal ignorant habits. When fully present, we realize we're not truly angry at that person. An old wound has flared up. We're not truly afraid of the future. We're repeating an old story of the mind. We're not truly tired. We simply haven't paused to breathe. And when seen clearly, emotions that seemed like mountains dissolve like smoke. Without mindfulness, the mind is like a wild horse dragging us wherever it wants. With mindfulness, we become the one holding the reins, not forcing, simply guiding gently, because you cannot make the mind stop thinking. You can only know it is thinking, then gently bring it back to the present. Living with mindfulness doesn't turn life rosy, but it turns us into someone who can walk in the rain without getting soaked. We no longer thrash, resist, or pull ourselves into the storm of things that haven't happened. We simply take each step, clearly knowing each step. Mindfulness is not avoiding emotions either. On the contrary, it is daring to look straight at them without being swallowed. Sad, know you are sad. Angry, know you are angry. Worried, know you are worried. Just by knowing emotions soften. Because emotions are like children, when seen, they scream less. To cultivate mindfulness, you don't need to do anything grand. Just start with very small things. Each morning, spend 5 minutes breathing slowly and quietly. At each meal, eat a bit more slowly. Chew a bit more thoroughly. Each time you step outside, feel the soles of your feet touch the ground. Each time the phone rings, take 1 deep breath before answering. If done regularly, these small things create a habit of presence, and that habit will change your whole life. When you live mindfully, you'll realize you don't need to change your entire life to be at peace. You only need to change how you're present in each moment. Peace isn't somewhere in the future. Peace is in this very moment where you are breathing, stepping, living. And if you can be fully present in this moment, then whether you are splitting wood, carrying water, washing dishes, or sitting on a bus in a crowded city, you are living in meditation. And that is right mindfulness. In a secluded stretch of deep green valley, an ancient Zen monastery nestled among rolling hills, surrounded by 100-year-old pines, rising like guardians of silence. Each morning, dew clung to the moss-covered roof tiles, and the temple bell sounded in solemn tones, echoing long through the dark wooden corridors. The air there seemed filtered free of worldly noise, leaving only the slow breath of the mountains and the faint whisper of leaves meeting the wind. In that monastery there was a young trainee monk known for intelligence, diligence, and quickness beyond his peers. He memorized sutras, fluently remembered each verse, and whenever there was work to do, he was the fastest, never shirking heavy tasks. The teachers often praised his will and his wits. But there was one thing that made the whole monastery wary: a temper like fire. At the slightest contradiction, his face would flush red, his eyebrows bristle, and his eyes flare with anger. His chest heaved. His breath grew rapid like a furnace blowing hot. Words shot from his lips like arrows sharp as knives, leaving others hurt, even when they meant no harm. Meals afterward often sank into heavy silence while he sat with head lowered, chewing each grain of rice as if biting into stone. What tormented him more than others' looks, however, was the struggle inside. Each time he lost his temper, once the heat passed, his heart sank like a stone. In his small room, he tossed at night, listening to the clock tick, unable to settle. He asked himself, "Why can't I control myself? Why can something so small make me erupt like a volcano?" He tried to hold back, to grit his teeth and stay quiet. But his anger rose like sudden gusts in a clear sky, without warning and beyond restraint. One afternoon, as the last light slanted across the corridor, the master summoned him. The master was old, his gait unhurried like flowing water, but his eyes shone like embers sleeping under ash. He didn't scold, didn't lecture. At length, he simply led the student behind the temple to a pond hidden among bamboo. The pond was small, its water crystal clear, flat like a green mirror. Clouds drifted lazily across its surface. The mountain's reflections lay still, disturbed only by a tiny ripple when a water skimmer touched down. It was so quiet, you could hear a dewdrop fall from a bamboo leaf. The master spoke voice light as wind. "Starting tomorrow, come here each morning. No chanting, no studying precepts. Just sit and look at the water. Do nothing else." The young monk was slightly puzzled, but did not ask. On the first day, he couldn't sit 5 minutes before springing up. His mind leapt like a monkey remembering unfinished chores, someone's displeasing words, arguments he hadn't yet won. His whole body prickled, restless, itchy. On the second day, he forced himself to sit longer. After 10 minutes, his mind surged again. Unfinished stories, retorts. He still wanted to make resentments, not yet cooled, filed in, one after another, like crowds jostling in a market, noisy and chaotic. He clenched his teeth, telling himself to endure, but every muscle tightened like a string about to snap. Even so, each morning he returned to the pond, sat quietly, and looked at the water. Then, one morning, just as the sun crested the peaks and mist hung like smoke, he sat for a long time without counting minutes. A light breeze passed, raising a few small ripples, and he suddenly noticed something strange. When he stirred, the water ruffled. When he stilled, the water lay flat like a mirror. Seeing this, his whole being seemed to pause. Outside, sounds receded. For the first time, his mind grew still like the pond. No more waves of fury pounding his chest. No more sparks flaring in his head. No more retorts loading on his tongue. Only steady breathing and a quiet space within. From that day on, he still worked, still studied, still. met plenty of vexing situations as before. But the flare-ups no longer exploded, not because the world had grown gentler, but because his mind no longer got dragged along. Whenever he felt anger flicker inside, he recalled the morning pond, and his mind settled on its own, like water after the wind. People at the monastery were surprised to find his words no longer cut his gaze, no longer sparked his steps, no longer thudded heavily on the stone. His face softened, his eyes cleared like water. When asked his secret, he simply smiled, said nothing, and walked back toward the pond behind the temple, where clouds still drifted slowly mirrored on the still surface. That story vividly proves what the Buddha taught. When the mind is settled, reality reveals itself. When the mind is agitated, everything grows murky. The mind is like a pond. When wind rises, the surface waves. The moon, still whole in the sky, shatters into 1,000 fragments. When the wind calms, the pond lies smooth like a mirror, and the moon reappears full and bright. The moon never vanished, only when the water churned could the eye no longer see it. Likewise, truth never departs. Only when the mind is tangled can wisdom not recognize it. In modern life, people rush to fix outer chaos while forgetting the root lies within. When the mind is tangled, every word becomes a thorn, every matter a threat, everyone around us an opponent. But when the mind is calm, those same matters and people become gentler and easier to understand. It's not that the world has changed, it's that the mind has quieted enough to reflect the nature of things clearly. Keeping the mind like a still pond is the foundation for seeing clearly, understanding rightly, and acting properly amid a turbulent world. In the Buddha's teaching, this is called right concentration, a mind that abides steady and unmoved by wandering thoughts. Right. Concentration is not forcing the mind to stop thinking, but stopping the chasing after thoughts. Not shutting down the mind's flow, but no longer being swept away by it, like sitting on a riverbank watching the water flow. You don't jump in, don't scoop it up, don't push it away. Just watch. And then, the water still flows, but you are no longer wet. Modern life pulls people ever farther from concentration. The mind is constantly in multiple windows mode, working while thinking of messages, listening while preparing counter-arguments, living today while worrying about next month. The mind becomes a screen with windows popping up non-stop, none fully closed, none fully seen. So the more we do, the more exhausted we get. The more we know, the more tangled we feel. Many minds whirl like a cyclone. Even while the body sits still inside, it's sprinting. Many who begin meditation complain that as soon as they close their eyes, thoughts flood in unfinished plans, numbers waiting to be processed, nameless worries, and they panic, deciding meditation isn't for me because they can't stop the stream. But the truth is, you don't need to stop it. You just need not to follow it. The mind is like the sky, thoughts are like clouds. Clouds drift, yet the sky does not move with them. In the same way, thoughts can arise, fade, and return, but they don't have to carry the mind along. We cannot make waves cease, but we can become the pond so that even when waves rise, they don't break our inner stillness. When we learn to observe without clinging, reacting or judging, the stream of thoughts naturally settles like dust when the wind dies. In that quiet, the mind comes to rest, not because thoughts end, but because we are no longer led by them. Right. Concentration does not come from grasping, but from softly releasing attachment. The more you try to hold the mind still, the more it stirs. The more you want concentration, the less it comes. Like trying to press a ball underwater, the harder you push, the higher it pops up. Only when you let go does it float, then settle. So with the mind, right, concentration isn't forcing stillness, but naturally settling when you no longer resist or chase. When the mind is settled, sight grows clearer. Things that seemed complicated become plain, no longer veiled by emotional dust, like a mirror freshly wiped, reflecting truthfully on its own. No need to overanalyze right and wrong. Just let the mind be quiet and truth appears. Some worry, if the mind is too still, won't it become passive? In fact, a concentrated mind isn't lazy. It isn't scattered, but it is keen, bright, and flexible. Like a calm lake that can reflect the entire sky, not because it never moves, but because it moves in harmony. By contrast, when the mind is agitated, we react impulsively, hastily, without clarity, and that is the root of mistakes. Sometimes in a tense space, one person who maintains concentration can shift the whole atmosphere. In a heated dispute where voices rise and arrows of words fly, where no one hears anyone, the presence of one steady mind can become the axis of the situation. That person need not say much or impose views, just sit, breathe evenly, and keep an eye as still as a pond. Then, when the noise subsides, a few gentle words can calm the whole room. Not because those words are sharper or carry more authority, but because they come from a settled mind and thus have weight. A concentrated mind is like a stone dropped on water. It does not stir up storms, but helps contentious ripples fade. In life, many conflicts don't need debate or argument. They need someone calm enough not to be swept away. When the mind is steady, presence itself becomes speech, a word unspoken that carries far. Right concentration isn't only for the meditation hall. It needs to be present in everyday moments. In arguments, so you aren't dragged by anger. At work, so you don't get swept up in worry. In caring for others, so you aren't shaken to exhaustion by their emotions. For no one can hold another steady if they themselves are trembling. To cultivate right concentration, start small. Spend a few minutes each morning sitting quietly, just watching the breath. Don't control, don't force watch as you would a river flowing. In the middle of the day, pause for a few minutes to do nothing. No phone, no music, no reading. Just sit so the mind has room to breathe. Whenever emotion surges, stop talking. Inhale deeply. Look at the emotion as you would a cloud coming and going, not you. At first, the mind will resist. Grow restless, want to get up right away. But if you persist little by little, it will grow accustomed to quiet. Once it tastes that quiet, it will return on its own like water finding its way back to the lake. Right concentration isn't fleeing the world. It is living in the world without being swayed by it. Like a mountain standing in a storm. The storm may howl, but the mountain stands. Not because it can't hear the storm, but because it doesn't move with it. When the mind settles, you'll find life is the same, but you are not. What once ignited anger no longer shakes you. What once bred anxiety no longer reaches you. What once caused panic is now only a small ripple on a vast lake, because the mind is no longer dragged away. And only when it isn't dragged away can we truly see things as they are, no longer through lenses of emotion, bias, fear, or craving. Just seeing. And when seeing is clear, wisdom arises on its own, like the moon appearing when clouds part. That is why the Buddha called right concentration the foundation of wisdom. When the mind is concentrated, wisdom is bright. When the mind is scattered, wisdom is dim, like water. To see the bottom of the lake, you don't need to do anything to the bottom, just let the surface be still. To see truth, you don't need to hunt everywhere, just let the mind be still. And when the mind is still, the answers you sought will appear naturally clear as a full moon on a glassy lake. And that is right concentration, not running from life, but pausing within so life cannot pull you away. So the mind rests like a windless pond, and wisdom shines like moonlight through the night. In the courtyard of the ancient temple, beneath a sky as open as a palm, stood an old peach tree that had been there for decades. Its trunk was rough, its long vertical cracks like the handwriting of time, with a thin layer of moss at the base, and vines lightly twining its feet like children tugging at an elder's sleeve. Each dawn, while the first bell still vibrated in the mist, the tree's shadow stretched across the old brick ground, casting a calm, gentle hush. In spring, the wind was still cold, the earth still tight with chill gray clouds drifting slowly, as if stopping by the temple eaves to borrow a bit of warmth. Just then, the peach tree burst into bloom. From the tips of its gaunt branches flashed countless pale pink blossoms, small like a maiden's modest smile, clustered in tufts, like little clouds perched on the shoulder of the season. The delicate scent mingled with the air so light it felt as though one strong breath might dissolve it. Brown sparrows flitted excitedly among the layers of flowers, and the whole courtyard seemed a shade brighter. When summer came, the blossoms withdrew, like someone who has finished their task making way for leaves. The branches covered themselves in deep green, spreading a cool round shade over the red brick. Under that canopy at noon, the novices spread mats and opened their sutras. Their voices rose in steady cadence, blending with cicadas shrilling along the bamboo hedge. Peach leaves swayed gently like a mother's fan, lulling a child to sleep. One noon, a gust rushed through. Shadows of leaves tumbled across the sutra pages. The children giggled, then fell silent again, when the wooden fish knocked the midday strokes, tuk, tak, clear and crisp. Autumn arrived and the leaves changed color in the quietest way. Green today, yellow at the edges by tomorrow, and then one morning, the whole crown glowed like a gentle flame. Leaves fell gold across the bricks, rustling like old brown robes. Each passing footstep lifted a faint fragrance of earth and sun. In the days leading up to Vulan beneath the peach tree, everyone bowed their heads longer than usual, remembering the departed. The leaves fell slowly, as if they too knew to follow the rhythm of people's hearts. Winter came. Wind lashed the mountain slope, the sky gray like unwritten paper. The peach tree stood bare, only darkened branches, sketching calligraphic strokes across the clouds, like a brush painting Zen lines. Some said the tree looked desolate and sad, but those who knew the courtyard understood that was when the tree breathed the deepest, quietly gathering strength for another spring. On an early spring day, the sun was just warm enough to melt dew at the tips of bamboo leaves, and roosters crowed sharp from the hamlet below. The first petals had begun to fall. Each petal, thin as tissue, spun a tiny circle in the air and touched lightly down on the brick, almost soundless, leaving only a pink dot on red. Beneath the tree, a small novice sat crying, his eyes red. The moment a petal left the branch, his heart seemed to crack. He lifted each petal, set it in his trembling palm, and whispered, as if afraid to hurt it, "Why do they fall?" They just bloomed. The spring breeze passed, tugging at his robe. He looked up at the clusters of pink glinting in the sun, then back down at the thin petals in his hand. It all happened so quickly, like a prank played by the sky. The master walked along the corridor, rosary in hand, his shadow long on the stone steps. He stopped at the edge of the tree's shade, stood still for a moment, as if listening to the earth's whisper, then slowly approached his gaze, tender and deep. He did not rush to ask why the boy was crying. After a long look, he spoke softly. "Because blossoms fall, the next season's flowers can bloom." The boy looked up, tears still on his cheeks. At his age, all beauty was worth holding on to. Every parting felt like loss. He pressed his lips together. "But they're still so beautiful." The master set a warm hand on the boy's sweaty crown and said in an even, low voice, "If the flowers do not fall and the branch is not lightened, it cannot welcome a new season. All things must change for life to go on." Another petal fell and landed on the back of the boy's hand. This time he didn't hurry to pick it up. He looked closely, saw veins, fine as strands of hair, saw the edge of the petal curl slightly, like a tired smile after a long dance. Above, the breeze stirred, and more petals drifted down, light as pink snow. The master sat down at the trunk, leaning lightly against the cracked bark. He brushed away a few flakes of bark and spoke as if telling a story. "When I first came to the temple, this peach tree was already here. One year the cold was harsh and the buds froze. Blossoms were sparse. Another year, spring rains poured without end. Petals wilted as soon as they opened. Some years the balance of sun and wind was just right, and the whole tree erupted the courtyard as if clouds had descended. But no matter the year, the flowers fell, and because they fell, they bloomed again the next." He gently lifted a fallen petal and placed it in the boy's palm. "See, falling is not the end. The petal returns to the earth. The earth feeds the roots feed the shoots. That cycle can't be seen with the eye, but the tree knows. Life moves through change, not into nothingness." The novice wiped his cheeks and drew a long breath. The faint fragrance of blossoms, the damp scent of moss, the mild warmth of sunlight, all seemed to enter him at once. For the first time, he saw the beauty in falling, not as an ending, but as a promise. The evening bell sounded from the main hall, long and warm. Each chime of the small gong after the bell fell, like a steady drop of water, drawing people out of small sorrows into the larger breath of the temple. Beneath the peach tree, the boy sat a bit straighter and opened his hands, letting the petals rest there instead of clutching them tight as before. "Master, if I also have to let fall the things I cling to feel lighter, will it hurt?" The master looked at his still flushed cheeks and smiled slightly. "Yes. A branch also knows pain when it releases its flowers, but that very pain makes room for new buds to push through. The suffering from long-held clinging is what truly exhausts you. The pain of letting go is the pain of growing." A gust tilted a flurry of petals like slanting rain. Far off, the sparrows startled up and settled again, chattering as if they had never left. The sun tipped past the ridge. The last light poured over the bare twig tips, turning them into ink brush strokes on an orange sky. Against that backdrop, a few blossoms still clung flaming pink like a final greeting. The novice stood, brushed his robe, and put his hands together to bow to the tree. In that bow were both thanks for a season of bloom and a blessing of peace for the petals about to fall. On the way back to the refectory, his steps were slower, lighter. Each dry leaf crackling beneath his sandals sounded like a note just completed. Night fell. The north wind turned drier. Under the eaves, a thin layer of petals clung to the guttered wood and in a blink were wet with dew. By morning, the brick courtyard blushed pale pink as if dusted with fine powder. The novices swept. The brooms rasped softly as they gathered petals into small piles. The boy from yesterday no longer brimmed with tears. He lifted his broom as if careful not to hurt the pink scraps, gathered them, and spread them at the base of the tree, like laying a soft blanket for its roots. Time went on as it always had. Spring passed. Summer came. Autumn turned. Winter returned. The old peach tree still stood like a clock with no hands, telling seasons in its own way. And each time the blooming returned when wind was still cold and the earth still taut, the whole temple would share the slightest smile. The blossoms are here, here to fall, fallen to come again. Beneath the tree, someone still now and then sits and weeps like that boy, but usually only for a moment. Then they pick up a petal, set it on an open palm, and understand if blossoms do not fall, the branch does not lighten, and the new season cannot enter. Without change, life cannot continue, and with that understanding, the heart suddenly feels light, like a branch just released a cluster of pink to make room for a tiny bud stirring deep in the wood. This is a truth so simple, everyone has heard it, and so profound that most still live as if they never knew it. Impermanence. Everything changes. Nothing remains forever in its old form. Even a freshly opened flower will one day fade. Even the brightest spring must pass through a bitter winter. No peak fails to yield to decline. No sorrow stays forever. No joy is unchanging through time. Every moment, whether we want it or not, is quietly shifting. The new always arrives quietly. The old always departs quietly. People suffer not because change happens, but because they try to hold what cannot be held. The more we cling, the more we are dragged backward and torn by time's current. Accepting impermanence is not resignation. It is understanding that everything only pauses beside us, so we treasure it more while it's here and stay more serene when it's gone. In the moment, we know everything will change. The heart learns to live fully in the present, the only place life truly exists. Seeing impermanence clearly is the foundation of right view, a correct understanding of life. When we do not see impermanence, we try to hold everything as if it were fixed. That very holding breeds suffering. When in love, we want the other never to change. When wealthy, we want money never to dwindle. When healthy, we believe we'll never be sick. When happy, we expect joy to last forever. But everything changes. And when change comes, people panic, hurt, and collapse not because of the loss itself, but because they weren't prepared to receive the truth that loss is certain. Some only truly grasp impermanence when everything they clung to dissolves in an instant. Loss often arrives like a storm sweeping away not just property and status, but the sense of control we thought was solid. When life falls apart, we think we are finished too. But the truth is, nothing is forever, not even pain. Impermanence does not only take, it also brings. Spring cannot arrive unless winter yields. A tree cannot sprout without shedding old leaves. Today's breakage may be the open space needed for something new to form. Our deepest suffering is not from losing, but from believing what we have will last. When we realize everything changes, the heart grows lighter. We no longer despair in loss, nor grow arrogant in gain, because we understand life does not stop at what is gone. It is silently arranging a new season like blossoms falling, so the branch grows light while tiny buds quietly form in the hush. Seeing impermanence, we stop clinging to anything. Not to success, knowing it too will change. Not to failure, knowing it too will change. Not to praise or blame gain or loss coming or going. For all are like petals on their way to falling. And when the mind doesn't cling, it begins to feel light. Right view is not a pessimistic gaze. It doesn't say everything will pass to justify giving up. Right view looks straight at the fact of change so we can live more fully in each moment. Knowing flowers will fall, we look at them with our whole heart. Knowing loved ones cannot stay forever, we cherish each conversation. Knowing health is not permanent, we listen to the body and live more moderately. Impermanence does not rob life of value. Impermanence increases the value of every second we live. Some wonder if everything changes, why make any effort since it will all fade anyway? But precisely because of impermanence, effort is precious. If things were fixed, we would be stuck in suffering forever. The cruel would remain cruel. The confused would never wake up. Impermanence is not a denial of effort's worth. It guarantees effort can bring change. A tiny seed can become an ancient tree only because things don't stand still. A once lost mind can grow clear because day by day it keeps learning and transforming. Nothing lasts forever, so every wholesome act today can sow a different tomorrow. We do not strive to hold the unchanging. We strive to open a path for the new to arise within life's continuous flow. Seeing impermanence, pride fades. We know today's success does not secure tomorrow. Status, money, beauty, they are morning dew gone when the sun rises. The more one realizes impermanence, the more humbly and kindly one lives, not daring to boast or look down on anyone. That is also the root of compassion. Seeing life's fragility makes us gentler with one another. Seeing impermanence, despair lessens. No night lasts forever. No pain fails to soften. No wound refuses to close. No winter refuses to yield to spring. Knowing all things flow on sorrow grows less frightening. In modern life, people increasingly forget impermanence. They are swept up in news plans, contracts, goals, forgetting that all of it will one day be like petals falling to earth, dissolving into soil so something new can grow next season. Right view helps us step back and see the whole, so we don't get trapped in a single moment. Without the whole view, people mistake what's happening now for forever, so they hurt to exhaustion, rejoice to delirium, or rage beyond reason. Seeing impermanence clearly, we live more awake. We don't delay love knowing the other may leave. We don't wait for free time to live knowing time won't wait. We don't let the mind wander into the past or flail in the future knowing this moment is all that truly exists. And when we live each moment fully, we no longer fear losing, because each moment has already been fully lived. Impermanence doesn't make life less beautiful. It makes life more beautiful because fragility makes each moment precious. Knowing petals will fall, we finally stop to truly look. Knowing laughter will fade, we listen to every note. Knowing a meeting will end, we speak more sincerely. And that is right view of impermanence. Not to wallow, not to fear, but to know that all suffering will pass and all happiness should be cherished before it passes. Because if blossoms did not fall, next season would not bloom. And without impermanence, life would stand still. And standing still is the end of life. Only by knowing that everything changes do we truly learn how to live. That morning, the temple courtyard was bathed in a soft honey-gold light. The early breeze slipped through the wooden corridors, rustled the bamboo rows, then casually skimmed the saffron robes drying on the line, making them billow like small sails about to set out to sea. The damp earth left by last night's rain blended with the faint scent of Bodhi leaves, creating a simple yet unusually serene fragrance. The young novices chirped like a flock of sparrows, each busy with a task. One swept the courtyard, one watered flowers, another crouched to pull stubborn blades of grass from the gaps between old bricks stained by time. The sound of bamboo brooms brushing the bricks whispered like a morning tune, gentle and steady, as if without being told, everyone had fallen into the calm rhythm of the ancient temple. Suddenly, a burst of giggles broke that tender stillness. A young novice, still round-cheeked, swept while glancing to the side, then grabbed his belly and laughed. His eyes had landed on a fellow novice crouched by the mossy wall, gathering dry leaves, wearing an old brown robe patched all over. The stitching wavered and slanted like a child's first clumsy handwriting. Some patches had faded, clashing with the robe's deep brown, blotched like scars sewn in a hurry. The more he looked, the funnier it seemed. A chuckle in his throat swelled into loud ha-ha-s echoing across the brick courtyard. Then he tossed out a careless, seemingly harmless remark. "Look at that. A robe like a rag." The laughter rippled outward like a pebble thrown on a still pond. A few other boys smiled too, as if it were just a small joke on an ordinary morning. But one person didn't laugh, the boy in the patched robe. He froze. The small hand that had been steadily picking up dry leaves halted midair. His throat jerked as though swallowing something bitter. His eyelids blinked rapidly. His gaze dropped, avoiding every eye turned his way. The robe on his body suddenly felt heavy. At that moment, under the eaves, the master was sweeping the last Bodhi leaves left from the night rain. He was older back, straight as a pine, each stroke slow as breath. He heard the laughter clear as the crack of a dry twig in a garden at the height of spring. The master paused. He didn't speak at once. He leaned the broom gently against the wall and walked unhurried toward the novices. The soft clack of wooden clogs on brick sounded like a small drum, signaling that something was about to happen. The air in the courtyard seemed to thicken. He stopped before the laughing novice, his voice low and light as early morning tea steam. "What are you laughing at?" Startled, the boy gripped his broom handle, eyes darting for an escape. Finally, he stammered, because his robe is so patched. It looks funny." The master didn't look at the robe or the stitches. He only looked into the boy's eyes, calm as an autumn lake, yet seeming to see through the thoughts hiding inside the child. Then he spoke. His voice was neither loud nor harsh, but each word fell like a drop of water onto dry ground. A torn robe does not make a person poor. A person is poor only when their heart holds contempt. With that single line, even the wind seemed to stop. The laughing novice stood stunned. The sparrows on the roof fell silent. The other boys lowered their heads. A hush settled, broken only by droplets ticking from the eaves onto the courtyard. As for the boy in the patched robe, he still stood there, hands full of dry leaves, but his shoulders trembled slightly, as if an invisible stone had been lifted from his chest. Slowly, his eyes lifted, not to look at anyone, but as if to look toward the sky growing bright behind the far ridge. A light breeze slipped by, lifting a few yellow leaves from his hands, spinning them in the air before they landed on the damp bricks. The patched robe stirred in the wind, and in that moment, no one saw it as shabby anymore. They saw it as remarkably gentle. In life, we often judge one another unconsciously by a few outward signs: a frayed outfit, messy hair, old shoes, a beat-up bike. Those judgments come fast, almost by reflex, as if a person's worth could be measured by the shell they wear. But no one ever became greater by belittling someone else. Contempt doesn't raise us up. It only shrinks the heart. Truly great souls begin with compassion, with the ability to pause before judging, to look past the surface and to ask, what has this person lived through to arrive here? Then the heart softens, the gaze grows less sharp, and the mind opens to understanding. Compassion is not pity. It is seeing others as living beings, trying to make their way even if clumsily. When we can put ourselves in another's place and know that their lack does not increase our value, we truly grow, not in the eyes of the world, but within our own hearts. Nobility lies not in what we possess, but in how we treat those who have less. In the Buddha's teaching, this is called right thought, right intention, thinking that is correct and nourishing, that harms neither self nor others. And the root of right thought is compassion. Without compassion, even the sharpest thinking turns cold. Without right thought, compassion easily becomes blind. The two must go together like a bird's two wings. Those without right thought tend to see others as objects to compare sort and rank. Their minds constantly ask, who's better, who's worse, who deserves respect, who deserves contempt, and they think that is clarity. In truth, it is the least clear vision clouded by ego, like looking into a mirror smeared with dust. Those with right thought are different. They don't rush to stick labels on people. They pause to ask, what has this person gone through to become like this? Is there something in them I haven't understood? Can I look at them with a gentler gaze? Because they know no one is born to be mocked. Each person is fighting a battle we cannot see. Someone once shared that in her early school years, living in an orphanage meant she wore hand-me-downs. Classmates called her the poor girl. Each time her heart felt clawed, yet she forced a smile and kept walking. Years passed. She studied hard, worked hard, and became successful. But when she looked back, she said the deepest hurt wasn't being poor. It was the way some eyes looked at her, as if she didn't deserve respect. That's a quiet but cutting truth. What wounds a child most isn't lack of food or clothes, but the lack of gentleness in how others see them, the absence of recognition, of respect, of being treated as a whole human being. Poverty can be overcome, but the feeling of being unworthy of love can last a lifetime unless healed by compassion. Right. Thought keeps the mind from being led by ego, and compassion keeps the mind from turning hard. Together, they allow us to live without harming one another. With sharp thought but no compassion, we become skilled judges but lack humanity. With compassion but no clear thought, we can be naive, exploited, or do good in the wrong way. Balancing both, we can truly live awake in the world. This is even more urgent today. The modern world teaches us to see each other through rankings, scores, income, looks, fame. Sarcasm and snark are praised as clever. But that is only another kind of poverty of heart. Those rich in compassion don't need to prove superiority because they understand better or worse does not define the worth of a life. A Zen master often told young students, when you see someone dressed plainly, don't assume they're lazy. When you see someone quiet, don't assume they're dull. When you see someone fail, don't assume they're incapable. They may be spending all their strength to rise after things you've never had to face. And if you can't lift them up, at least don't push them down with a contemptuous gaze. Right. Thought is not only thinking correctly, but thinking in ways that nourish yourself and others. Seeing someone succeed instead of envy, think they've worked hard and so will I. Seeing someone fail instead of disdain, think they're hurting. I can speak softly so it hurts less. Seeing someone wrong instead of judging, think I've been wrong too. If I was forgiven, they deserve a chance to begin again. Such thoughts don't just help others, they protect your own heart from hardening. Each time you look down on someone, you don't truly lower them. You lower the quality within yourself. Each time you think of someone with gentleness, you not only ease their heart, you nurture the noblest part of your own. Someone once asked a Zen master, if I'm too gentle, won't people take advantage of me? The master replied, gentleness doesn't mean weakness. Compassion doesn't mean naivety. Right thought helps you discern what is true help and what is exploitation. Compassion keeps your caution from turning into coldness. Some guard themselves by building stone walls. The truly strong know how to open the door and still remain themselves. To cultivate right thought and compassion, you don't need anything grand. Begin with small things. When you're about to judge someone, pause and ask, do I know their whole story? Each day, spend a few minutes reflecting on the good in people around you. When you see someone vulnerable, try seeing them as a child needing a hug, not a scolding. If practiced steadily, these small acts will change how you see the world, and when your view changes, your life changes. Right thought and compassion do not leave you disadvantaged. They help you keep your humanity in a world that easily turns people mechanical. In the end, a person's worth isn't measured by achievements, but by how others feel in their presence. No one ever says, I'm grateful to the one who mocked me, but millions remember forever the first person who looked at them without judgment. So when you step out into the world each day, bring not only your intellect, but your kindness. Not only sharp thoughts, but gentle ones. Because a compassionate thought can save a soul on the brink. And that is right thought and compassion, not to seem noble, but to keep the heart from turning to stone and the gaze gentle in a hurried world. That early morning, the first light streamed into the meditation hall through half-open wooden windows, laying a honey-gold sheen over the old brick floor. The space was so quiet you could hear the woodpecker in the garden and the soft rustle of brown robes as the practitioners adjusted their posture. In that stillness, one young monk stood out. He was quick, agile, with a remarkable memory. Hearing a teaching once, he could repeat it, word for word, then add sharp reasoning that impressed many brothers. In discussions, he always jumped in, eagerly spoke, clearly, eyes lit as if with fire. Visitors to the temple often marveled, "This young novice will surely become a brilliant Dharma teacher one day." But there was one thing. He didn't know how to listen. In every conversation, when others had spoken only half a sentence, he would cut in, rebutting in rapid fire like arrows, loosed one after another. At first, many brothers tried to keep the peace, smiling and nodding, but gradually they fell silent. No one wants to talk with someone who only waits to win, not to understand. He didn't realize this. In his mind, he believed he was showing his wisdom, defending the truth. But every conversation with him slowly turned into a match where whoever spoke more slowly got steamrolled. Whoever took a moment to think got interrupted. The meditation hall was meant to be a quiet place for listening, but whenever he was present, the air grew tense, like a string pulled too tight. Then it happened during a sutra study session. A brother stood to present voice, still shaky, and had barely read a few lines when the young monk sprang up, hand raised, firing off objections. His voice drowned out every other sound in the room. The other boy froze, eyes bewildered, as if splashed with a pail of winter water. The room fell briefly silent. At the back, the master had been sitting quietly from the start. He held his head, slightly bowed, hands folded before his belly, eyelids lowered as if listening even to the quiet between sounds. Suddenly, he reached for a small bronze bell and gently struck it. Clang. The clear tone rose and stretched like a fine thread pulled taut across the space. It wasn't loud, but it seemed to pierce the layers of noise spreading through the hall before dissolving back into silence. When the last overtone faded, the master lifted his head, his voice low and unhurried. "From today on, whenever you want to speak, please ring this bell." He placed the small bell in the young monk's hand and looked straight at him as if seeing through the ripples in his heart. "And you may speak, only after the bell has completely faded." The young practitioner was taken aback. The master's words weren't scolding yet. They landed like a stone dropped onto a rippling pond. He bowed to receive the bell, confused but obedient. On the first day, he tried to follow the instruction. In class, after hearing only a few sentences, counter-arguments flared up in his mind like straw catching fire. He hurried to ring the bell, then stood waiting for the tone to fade before speaking. But while he waited, each second felt like a minute. His heart pounded. His head burned with impatience. The instant the sound ended, he burst out quick and sharp, like a thrusting blade. On the second day, he still rang the bell often, but this time he paid more attention to its resonance. The sound swelled, then thinned like circular ripples spreading across water and disappeared. In that drawn-out moment of sound, something strange happened. He suddenly heard his own heartbeat steady like a distant drum. That feeling slowed his heart a beat, On the third day, while he was waiting for the bell's tone to fade, the brother who was speaking paused, his eyes briefly tinged with sadness. The young monk had never noticed that look before, and when the brother continued for the first time, he listened to the entire sentence, not to refute it, but simply to understand. The whole hall felt different. Voices no longer struck each other like stones. They wove together like small streams. He suddenly felt his heart grow calm like a lake after wind. Counter-arguments still arose, but no longer charged ahead like fire. They drifted by like clouds. From then on, he interrupted less, not because he forced himself into silence, but because he no longer felt an urgent need to speak. He learned to let others finish, to wait, to listen, to receive another's story with his whole heart. And then he realized something simple he had never understood before. Listening is not to reply. Listening is to understand. From that point, whenever someone spoke, he no longer saw them as opponents in a debate. He saw them as people opening a door, and his task was not to rush in to win, but to stand still and quietly receive what lay inside that door. The small bell still sat on the table each class. It no longer rang constantly as in the early days, but just seeing it, his heart would settle on its own, as if reminding him before wanting to be understood, learn to understand others first. That story points to something people today are losing: the art of listening. Listening seems simple, but it's one of the hardest skills, because most people don't truly listen. They only wait for their turn to speak. Their minds are not with the other's words, but busy drafting the next response. They think they're having a dialogue, but it's really two parallel monologues. In the Buddha's teaching, this is called mindfulness, in dialogue being fully present while listening, not wedging the ego between, not judging, not rushing to conclude, not preparing rebuttals while the other is still speaking. Mindfulness is not only for sitting in a quiet room. It needs to be present in everyday conversations, because those conversations are where our minds most easily lose their stillness. Deep listening doesn't mean agreeing with everything. Deep listening means understanding why the other person thinks, feels, and speaks that way. Behind every statement, there is always an untold story. Only when we understand that story can we respond with compassion instead of ego. Without listening, people drift apart, even while living close. Families no longer truly converse, only exchange information. Friends no longer truly connect, only wait to say their part. Colleagues no longer understand each other, only strive to prove themselves right. They think they're communicating more, but it's only being noisier. Without listening, there is no real connection. Deep listening requires laying the ego down. The ego always wants the last word to be right, to be the one who speaks. But when we set the ego aside, we no longer listen to win, we listen to understand. And that understanding is what heals. No one ever changed their mind because they were yelled at. But many have changed their lives because once someone listened to them with their whole heart. In an age where everyone wants to speak, a true listener is as rare as water in a desert. And because it's rare, the presence of a true listener has immense healing power. It tells the other, "You're not alone. I'm here. I hear you." Sometimes that's all someone needs to keep from collapsing. You don't have to wait for a formal sit-down to practice deep listening. You can start with small daily steps. When someone speaks, stop moving completely and look into their eyes. When they finish, count 3 breaths before replying. When you hear something you dislike, ask more questions to understand before you react. Listen not just with your ears, but with your eyes, your heart, and the deep quiet inside. Mindfulness in dialogue isn't a communication trick. It's a compassionate way of living. Because when you truly listen, you stop caring about being right and start caring whether the other person is hurting and whether your next words will hurt them more. That is the wisdom of compassion and the compassion of wisdom. Someone asked a Zen master, "If I listen too much, won't people walk all over me?" The master said, "Listening isn't perpetual silence. Listening is being quiet to understand, then speaking to help. Good listeners don't lose their voice. Their voice simply arises at the right moment and thus carries weight. Like a bronze bell, it doesn't ring constantly, but each strike can move the whole space. Mindfulness in dialogue doesn't make you weaker. It makes you steadier because you no longer speak while your mind is on fire. You speak when your mind is like a windless lake. And when the mind is still, words become like moonlight, gentle yet bright enough to show the way. That is the art of mindful listening. Not to win debates, but to win in the other person's heart. Because sometimes simply stopping long enough to hear someone out can save a relationship that seemed beyond repair. And sometimes deep listening is the highest form of love. That season, during a 3-month summer retreat, the monastery, tucked deep in the quiet mountains, became a world apart. No cars, no cell signal, only the damp scent of pine after rain, and the morning bell carried long on the wind. In that stillness, one young practitioner stood out above the rest. He was like a small flame that refused to go out. Up earlier than everyone to bed, later than everyone, he did everything fast and decisively, as if racing against time. Each morning, while the hall was still dim and the novices were quietly laying out cushions, he already sat in the center back, straight as an arrow, eyes shut, tight hands on his knees. Yet anyone who came close could see his shoulders were taut, and his breath was hurried like someone who had just climbed a steep hill. No one studied harder. During scripture class, while others were still slowly writing line by line, he had already copied several pages and looked up with blazing eyes. During work period, while others were calmly pulling weeds, he had carried 2 full baskets of dirt, sprinting across the courtyard so fast, the novices stared wide-eyed. But more and more, a nameless weariness flickered in his gaze. He sat the longest, yet his mind was as chaotic as a hive just smashed open. He breathed the most, yet his breathing was always urgent, as if constantly afraid of missing the enlightenment train. And so, each night when the hall sank into the rhythm of steady sleep, he still tossed and turned, his heart churned by thousands of thoughts, unfinished, not good enough, not worthy. He was running a race, but no one knew where the finish line was, least of all him. One noon sunshine poured like honey over the valley. Cicadas crackled as if sprinkling sparks through the air. After meditation, while others napped under the trees, the master called him to the river behind the monastery. The river curved around the mountain's foot like a great silk ribbon. The water was crystal clear, reflecting the deep blue sky and the lazy drift of white clouds. A light breeze ruffled the surface into small rings, as if someone were touching it with a fingertip. The master stood on the bank, gazed into the distance, then pointed to a small wooden boat loosely tied nearby. "Try rowing out to the middle." The young man was surprised, but stepped in. The boat rocked as he set his foot. The water clicked against the sides. He gripped the oar, drew a breath, and began to row. From the first stroke, he used all his strength. Each pull tore at the water as if he meant to split the river in two. Veins stood out on his arms. Sweat dotted his brow. The boat inched forward, then nearly stalled as a headwind began to blow. He clenched his teeth and rowed harder. Water splashed everywhere. The boat pitched wildly, but the harder he pushed, the more it just wobbled in place. The wind grew stronger. Little waves slapped the hull as if unseen hands were dragging it back. Before he reached midstream, his arms were aching and trembling. His heart pounded. His breath broke in gasps like a torch about to go out. From the bank, the master watched a long while, then called out, "Now, let go of the oar." The young man stared, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. "If I let go, how will I reach the other shore?" The master simply smiled. "Just try." He hesitated. His hands clutched the oar as if it were his only lifeline. But trusting his teacher, he slowly relaxed his shaking fingers and set the oar down inside the boat. The boat tipped lightly as if exhaling. And something strange happened. A steady breeze blew from upstream, gentle but consistent. Tiny ripples tapped the sides and nudged the boat along very slowly but smoothly, like a leaf being cradled by the current. Sunlight flickered on the water like gold leaf. A sparrow streaked by. Its shadow slid across the surface and dissolved like a dream. He sat still, eyes wide. No rowing, no straining, no tensed muscles yet. The boat moved. There was no sound of water being torn open, only the whisper of wind and the soft trickle beneath the hull. And for the first time in months, his heart was no longer in a rush. From the opposite bank, the master's voice carried over, warm and bell-like. "Do you see? You don't always need to strain to reach the shore. Sometimes you only need to go with the wind, with the current, and keep your mind awake, and you will still arrive." He sat there a long time. The sun still blazed, but something inside his chest softened like an invisible cord that had long cinched tight, had just been loosened. He understood. It turns out effort does not always mean charging ahead with all your might. True effort is knowing when to let go. The boat kept drifting light as a breath, and for the first time, he no longer longed to reach the far bank quickly, because he had learned to be fully present right on the water he was crossing. Diligence is not grim forcing. Diligence is right effort in ease. In the Buddha's teaching, right effort is one of the eightfold path, but many upon hearing effort assume do more, do it faster, push harder, outpace everyone. They think diligence is tightening themselves like an overstrung lute string, but strings wound too tight will snap. True diligence isn't about beating others. It's about steadily moving forward step by step without letting the mind be dragged into extremes, neither collapsing nor overstraining. A young man once complained he was burned out. He said, "I work day and night without rest, always afraid I'm not good enough, not fast enough. But the harder I try, the emptier I feel, like pushing a boulder up a hill only to have it roll back down." A Zen teacher told him, "Perhaps you're not lacking effort, you're lacking pauses." Because diligence isn't endless forward motion. It's knowing when to stop to catch your breath and check your direction. Otherwise, you're like the frantic rower, exhausted, yet only spinning in mid-river. Right effort always walks with mindfulness. It means that even as you strive, you keep awareness alive and don't lose yourself in the rush. Like a gardener tending flowers, not yanking the stems to make them taller, just watering daily, easing out the weeds, waiting for the sun. The plant grows, not because it's pulled, but because it's cared for with steadiness, gentleness, and patience. The paradox is, the more you rush, the slower you go. The tighter you strain, the more tangled you get. A tense mind sees less clearly. And when you can't see clearly, you'll run the wrong way, no matter how fast. Like someone sprinting in fog, the faster they run, the easier they get lost. Meanwhile, the one who walks slowly with clarity arrives first. Efforting in ease doesn't mean laziness. It means bring your whole heart to each step without demanding instant results. Do your best today, then release tomorrow's outcome. What lies within our power is only the seed we plant. Whether it sprouts, grows, and blooms depends on conditions. Conditions don't come by force. They come when the mind is quiet enough to notice opportunity when it appears. A teacher once watched many people lose their ideals simply because they burned out chasing them. They entered full of passion, but after a few years their eyes had gone dull. Only anxiety, tension, and fatigue remained. Not because their aim was wrong, but because their method was straining instead of softening. Like clutching a seed in your fist and demanding it sprout today, the tighter you squeeze, the less it can breathe. Right effort and letting go are two sides of one breath. Effort is the in-breath, wholehearted in the present. Letting go is the out-breath, so the result doesn't bind the mind. Inhaling without exhaling suffocates. Only by exhaling can you go the distance. People asked a Zen master, "How do I know whether my diligence is right effort or just grim forcing?" The master gently answered, "Look at your heart at day's end. If each effort leaves your heart lighter and wider, that's right effort. If each effort leaves it heavier and narrower, that's forcing. Right. Effort always brings a deep, quiet joy. Forcing brings only exhaustion and confusion. In our era, people are obsessed with speed. Speed of learning, speed of work, speed of wealth, speed of fame. They race like boats in a storm, not realizing it's precisely the rushing that slows them and the tension that makes them brittle. If you can sometimes set down the oar, let the wind move the boat, let the river guide, and let your mind hear itself again. Because sometimes letting go is how you go farthest. An old Zen master once said, "The path to awakening isn't for the fastest runner, but for the one who keeps going without quitting even slowly, yet in awareness and peace." The more seasoned practitioners live, the truer this rings. Those who hurry with a tangled mind often just circle. Those who go slowly with a clear mind often arrive first because they don't waste strength fighting the current. They skillfully work with it. Right effort and letting go are also a deep lesson in trust. Trust that you've planted the right seed, trust that favorable conditions will come, and therefore there's no need to force. Like the farmer who after sowing doesn't dig up the soil each day to check, but patiently waters, pulls weeds, and waits for sun, trusting the life sprouting quietly underground. And that is effort in ease. It isn't giving up. It is striving with a heart as light as a boat, with the oar set down so the wind can carry you. You still reach the shore, but you arrive awake, unspent, and without losing yourself. Because in the end, awakening isn't about who gets there first, but about who still carries a smile when they arrive. That afternoon, the sunlight slanted across the old bamboo groves encircling the quiet forest, a light breeze moving through the leaves with a soft rustle like a wordless song. In that hush, a gaunt old musician walked quietly along the dirt path toward the monastery. His figure stooped like a long shadow, leaning across the late day. Over his shoulder hung an old wooden instrument, its varnish flaking off in patches. Its strings worn and tightened so taut they hummed faintly each time he took a step. When he arrived, he hesitated at the veranda of the main hall, where the Buddha sat beneath the Bodhi tree eyes, calm as a glassy lake. The silence was so deep he could hear his own heart thudding. With trembling hands, he set the instrument down before him. World-honored one. He bowed his voice rough. I once loved music with all my heart. I used to think that if I simply tried without end, music would save me. He drew a deep breath as if gathering the last of his courage to finish. I practiced day and night, tightened every string, forced every finger. Each time a string went slack, I cranked it tighter. Each time a note was off, I doubled my practice. I wouldn't let myself rest, wouldn't let myself be weak. And then, his voice caught. Then the strings snapped, one, then two, then three, and I realized it wasn't only the strings that had broken, it was my soul. His bony hands clenched together, the knuckles shaking. In his sunken eyes flickered a light mixed of exhaustion and despair, the dim glow of someone who burned himself for so long in the fire of passion he could no longer tell light from ash. The Buddha was silent for a long time, his gaze gentle as if looking at a river in flood. Then he pointed softly to the instrument lying on the stone. When the strings are too tight, what happens? The musician swallowed and answered in a low voice as if afraid to disturb the stillness. They snap. And when the strings are too loose, the Buddha asked, his voice as light as a breeze, then they make no sound. The Buddha smiled faintly, sunlight laying a thin sheet of gold across his brow. The practice is the same. If you let yourself go, the mind grows lazy and scattered like slack strings that make no music. If you overstrain, the mind grows rigid and breaks like strings under too much tension. He looked straight into the man's eyes without blame, only a gentle, knowing compassion. Only when the strings are tuned just right does harmonious sound arise. Only when the mind is steady just enough can one live in peace. The words were light as wind, but fell into the musician's heart like drops on cracked desert earth. All the noise inside him eased. In that moment, he could hear the sparrows chattering at the bamboo tops, hear even his own sigh, and realized he had forgotten the sound of silence for many years. Evening drew down. The light faded behind the far mountains. The musician rose and bowed deeply. As he turned to leave, the old instrument still lay there, but for the first time in years, its strings were no longer tightened until they trembled. He loosened them slightly enough not to snap enough to ring with a gentle note. And for the first time, music was no longer a battle, but an easy breath. Someone once said they would always remember that instrument because it was a perfect metaphor for life. Most people live at two extremes, either letting themselves go or forcing themselves. Some plunge into indulgence, sensual pleasure spending, partying, no matter the consequences. Others drive themselves to exhaustion, living like a bow, forever drawn, afraid to even breathe for fear of missing a chance. Both think they are living to the fullest, but in truth, both are wearing themselves down. The Buddha called these the two extremes, the extreme of indulgence and the extreme of asceticism, and he taught that the path of liberation lies between them, the middle way. That path is called the Noble Eightfold Path, 8 right ways of living: right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. These 8 are like 8 strings on an instrument. None should be too tight or too loose. They must be in balance to make the symphony of an awakened life. Someone once told of a young person who came asking, "How can I live with ideals without burning out?" "The harder I try, the more pressure I feel. The more I practice, the heavier it gets." The reply: "Your goal may not be wrong. Your way of walking is. You're tightening your strings too much. You think the more you force, the faster you'll arrive. But strings pulled too tight will snap, and people pulled too tight will collapse." The middle way is not a lukewarm compromise, but knowing when to stop keeping your mind steady between two poles. Not drifting along and letting life carry you, but not forcing so hard you lose yourself. Like a rower who knows when to pull and when to let the wind help, still moving forward, but not obsessed with arriving right now. Those who don't understand the middle way live in constant swing. One day blazing like fire, the next ashen and spent. At times they hurl themselves into work like a storm. Then they throw it all away like a storm blown out. Their life is a pendulum forever arcing between extremes, and so they never find peace. Those who walk the middle way are different. They step steadily, not rushing, not stopping. They don't let ambition burn them up, and they don't let laziness snuff them out. Precisely because they neither burn nor go out, their flame lasts a very long time. In modern life, this matters even more. Today's world glorifies extremes: either give it everything, burn bright, or forget it, live it up. Few teach how to live just enough. Just enough isn't mediocrity. It's keeping balance so you can go the distance. A Zen teacher often reminded young students, imagine your life as an instrument. When you're too lax, the strings go slack, the tone turns dull, the music drags. When you're too harsh, the strings snap and the piece ends midway. Only when you keep the strings at the right tension does the music ring clear, and only then can you play to the end of your life's score. Following the Eightfold Path is learning to live in balance. Balance between ideals and reality. Balance between responsibility and rest. Balance between effort and letting go. Balance between action and stillness. No one can go far if they live as if sprinting, and no one can awaken if they live as if drifting. The middle way also teaches something profound. Do not use suffering as the measure of worth, and do not use indulgence as the measure of happiness. Some think only self-mortification counts as practice. They deny food, deny sleep, deny laughter, deny life. But the Buddha himself tried that path, and he nearly died without awakening. Others think happiness is having more and more, so they chase pleasure until they forget who they are. The more they indulge, the emptier they feel. The middle way steps out of both illusions. Those who live the middle way still work, still love, still laugh, still live in the world, but they do not let these things bind the mind. They eat not from greed, but to have energy to serve. They work not to outdo others, but to bring good into the world. They love not to possess, but to cherish each moment together. They don't need to live less than anyone else, only more consciously. Walking the middle path is not easy. The ego always wants extremes, either run flat out or lie down and quit. The middle way asks for wakefulness in each moment, a constant self-check. Am I too tight? Am I too loose? Each time you ask, you retune your life's strings so they sound the right pitch, neither warped nor snapped. The Eightfold Path is not distant theory. It is a map to keep from getting lost in life's extremes. Don't let your mind get drunk on victory, and don't let it sink in defeat. Don't chase after praise, and don't collapse under blame. Don't cling in obsession, and don't despair in loss. Let the mind be like a boat, moving midstream, leaning to neither bank, quietly advancing, steady and at ease. And that is the middle way, the noble Eightfold Path. Not lax, not overstrained, not living like strings too slack, nor living like strings too tight. Only when the strings are just right is the tone clear. Only when the mind is just right can life truly be peaceful. All along this journey, we've walked through old Zen stories, small, simple tales, yet each like a drop of water soaking into the heart, washing off the dust of ignorance clinging to it. These stories are not for us to admire some mystical past, but to shine on the present, how we are seeing, thinking, speaking, and living each day. For the Dharma is not up in the clouds. The Dharma is in each breath. We pause to hear ourselves in every word we weigh, so as not to wound in every step we take lightly, so we don't crush the flowers along the path. Each story is a small mirror, reflecting what we often forget amid a hurried life: compassion, wakefulness, the capacity to let go, and the art of keeping a calm heart amid constant change. This is also the essence the Buddha taught, that awakening is not some far peak, but the moment we look straight at reality without judging, without denying, without clinging, and embrace it with a whole heart. When the seeds of right mindfulness, right view, right intention are sown steadily in our days, our thoughts, our actions, we discover something wondrous. Life doesn't have to be perfect to be at peace, because peace isn't the absence of storms, but the ability to keep the heart steady, like a mountain in the wind. If these Zen stories have touched some part of your heart, please help share them so others can find the quiet they are seeking. Don't forget to subscribe to Buddhism Seeds Tap. Share this video and leave your reflections below, because perhaps a small word you share today will be the gentle light that guides someone through a dark night.